Good evening, everybody. It's just turned 6:30 and we will make a start. Before we go any further, though, can I remind members, if they need reminding, but also particularly advise members of the public who are speaking this evening, please do adjust your microphones and please ensure you speak clearly into them so everybody can hear what is being said this evening. We are holding an almost paperless meeting, so members of the committee and officers, generally speaking, will be referring to laptops and tablets to access their papers, look at drawings, etc. through the meeting. The meeting is being webcast, being filmed, it's being transmitted live and may well be used for subsequent broadcast via the Council's internet site. This will allow anybody that hasn't been able to make it here this evening to be able to see what's going on or indeed view it in the future. That makes it particularly important that people do turn on the microphones because it's the microphones that direct the camera to where you're sitting. So please do make sure you do that if at all. Well, please do. Can I ask the committee clerk to read out the public announcement?
Thank you, Chair. Council members, officers and members of the public are reminded that the use of mobile electronic devices during all meetings of the Council held in public is permitted for the use of Wi-Fi services only. You are asked to please leave the meeting should you wish to make or receive a telephone call. If the fire alarm goes off, please proceed down the stairs to the reception hall and out of the front entrance to congregate in the Queen's Gardens. The members of the committee will now introduce themselves.
Thank you. Councillor Paul Scott, Chair of the Planning Committee.
Good evening. My name is Pete Smith. I'm the Head of Development Management at Croydon.
Good evening. My name is Councillor Humayun Kabir. I'm the Vice Chair of the committee.
Jason Perry, no Councillor for Croydon Ward.
Chris Wright, Coulton East.
Good evening. Jamie Woodsley, Councillor in Bensham Manor.
Councillor Joy Prince, Wadden Ward.
Nicola Townsend, North Team Leader, Development Management.
James White, Planning Officer.
Councillor Wayne Trackerslaw at South Norwood Ward.
I'm Councillor Pat Clowder, representing Thornton Heath Ward, and I'm substituting for Councillor Bernadette Khan this evening.
Councillor Sue Winborn, Fairfield Ward.
Victoria Lower, Committee Manager.
My name is Sean Murphy, Legal Advisor to the committee.
Thank you very much, everybody. Brings us on to the first item on the agenda, the minutes of the last meeting. Please note the addendum to the addendum, or the second revision of the addendum, which does have a revised set and slightly more detailed set of notes for the pre-app presentation that we received at the last meeting. Are those minutes agreed? Agreed. Thank you very much. Apologies, we had the one that Councillor Pat Clowder mentioned earlier on. Unfortunately, Councillor Bernadette Khan can't be here this evening, but Councillor Clowder is substituting for her. Councillor Perry?
I have late apologies for Councillor Clancy. Councillor Richard Chatterjee is coming for him, but he's delayed on a train at the moment, so he will be here shortly.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. Disclosures of interest. Are there any disclosures of interest on the items that could be before us this evening? Councillor Wright.
We've got regarding Brighton Road, Purley, and we'll withdraw.
Okay, thank you. We don't have any items of urgent business, and there are no development presentations this evening. We have three applications for decision. One of those was referred by the Planning Subcommittee. I'm going to take that item first because it was referred from the last meeting, and I know a number of people were in the public gallery, so to avoid them having to go through a lengthy presentation on a previous application, we'll take that item first. And then we will take items 6.1, which is the Queen's Hotel, and then 6.2 in that order. Okay, so the first of those items, item 7.1.
On item 7.1, this is obviously for the Conservative Party headquarters down in Brighton Road. We're obviously members of that party, and there's an argument that there could be a pecuniary interest for us in that, as we're members of that. So we will be withdrawing from this particular item.
Okay. So the presenting officer will be Nicola Townsend. Nicola, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. As you say, this item was referred to Planning Committee from Subcommittee 2 weeks ago. The application is for land the rear of 36 Brighton Road, and it effectively proposes 2 houses, 1 3-bedroomed and 1 2-bedroomed house, which would front onto Purley Rise, which is effectively to the side and rear of the host site. So this slide takes you through, or shows you, the surrounding area. You can see at the front of the site is effectively what would have been a semi-detached property. It's in use as office space on the ground floor, as you just heard, with associated residential above. There is a change in land levels from the site, so the property at the front of the site is at a lower level than that of Purley Rise, and the land rises from the property at the front to this point here. As you can see from this slide, to give you a bit of context, it is predominantly residential surrounding the site here. The large area of car parking you see on the bottom right of your slide is the Tesco car park at Purley. I think it's worth pointing out that along this part of Purley Rise, historically was gardens, but there have been some more recent residential developments within this space, particularly at the sorry, the mouse has been here we go, particularly in this location here, and you can see the car parking here. In addition to that, there's also a property which faces onto Purley Rise in this location here on the opposite corner to the application site. So this photograph is taken effectively at the junction, looking up Purley Rise. You can see the effective garden area, which is surrounded by hedges, and the trees within the pavement there. And just on the bottom corner, you can see the flank of the host property. We've now moved up into Purley Rise on the corner, and we're looking back down to where the first photograph was taken, and back down to Brighton Road here. The application site is on your right. As you can see, there's further evidence of the quite substantial screening to the site itself. This photograph is taken effectively of the rear of the property on the opposite corner of Purley Rise, so that development, 2-storey property, which would effectively be opposite the application site. So the proposal is for 2 units. One is a 3-bedroomed unit and one is a 2-bedroomed unit. They are effectively L-shaped in design, with an area of courtyard just here and here. The main elements just here and here are effectively 2 stories with a single-storey element here, although due to the change in land levels, they'd effectively appear sort of as 1.5 in the street scene. And the top unit here, which is the 3-bedroomed unit, would also have access to this area of amenity space just here. It's worth noting that between the effectively first floor windows on the closest property to the host property on Brighton Road is 17 metres, and therefore slightly further to the adjacent property just here. So moving on, as you can see, the design of the development is quite contemporary. It is a timber-clad building. This is the first house, so the larger house, which proposes the 3 units, and you can see the 2-storey element just here, and then this is a cross-section through the single-storey wing, which would effectively provide the main living area for the site. And just here you can see the flank that would be visible onto Purley Rise. And very similar, this is the second unit. This one would be a 2-bedroomed unit. It effectively has a smaller area of living space at the ground floor in order to ensure that the tree protection areas for the trees within the pavement are protected, and therefore the trees are maintained. So just to give you that cross-section so there's a greater understanding of the land level changes in the area. So through the top section here, you can see the rear of the host property that has, as I say, the office on the ground floor and associated residential above. And then as the land levels rise, you can see the single-storey element of the first dwelling and the 2-storey section here, and then the second dwelling above. And then this is the level of Purley Rise here, with the properties on the other side, opposite side of Purley Rise, shown just here. As I said, the scheme is contemporary in its approach. It proposes a timber cladding with a green roof system, and as you can see, it has been designed to take into account the, sort of the green nature and character of the existing site, and as this is a CGI provided by the architects to give you an indication of how it would appear in the street scene. Thank you. The recommendation is for approval.
Thank you. Questions, clarification? I've got one straight away. Two, sorry. Tree loss. How many trees would be lost as a result of this, and are any of those a TPO tree? And related to that, are we content that this sort of overhang arrangement to protect the root protection area of some of the street trees is actually going to work as a sort of appropriate form of building, an appropriate response to the situation? And secondly, obviously, Pearly Rise is a sort of a changing sort of character. We're seeing properties or applications come forward, properties being built to create the sort of second side. At the moment, it's like a sort of one-sided street. And a good example is the house on the other side of the road that's already been built recently. How well do we feel that the form of development that's proposed here relates to that emerging sort of character? Because the sort of sense of the sort of the buildings we can see in the perspective before us now is very much that they don't address the street. They're almost like sort of large garden buildings, as opposed to units that have a proper, you know, a more traditional street frontage.
Sorry, going first to your questions regarding the trees. The garden is quite mature and there are a large number of shrubs surrounding the site. There are no trees on site which are subject to a tree preservation order, and therefore any loss of trees on site, they're not protected, and therefore the consideration would be character and whether they should be retained to maintain character. As you can see from the application, it does propose to retain a significant number of the hedging around the site in order to maintain that character. Clearly, the trees within the pavement, which you saw in the photograph, are on council-owned land. They're within the public highway and within the public footway, and we have a clear desire as an authority to maintain and retain those trees. As a result of that, our tree officers and the council's own highways officers have looked at this application and have said that they are satisfied that, subject to the conditions requiring the tree protection measures to be provided on site prior to any development commencing, that those trees should be protected and maintained. Moving on to your second point about the changing character of the streets and the emerging character, you're quite right. I showed you the property on the opposite corner of Pearly Rise in this location here, which is of quite a traditional character, I would say, with pitched roofs, the white render, and picks up on a lot of the more original dwellings within the street scene. However, as you look down Pearly Rise to this location here, those dwellings which have consent, and it's at the rear of, apologies, just bear with me so I get the numbers correct, the rear of 46 and 50 and 52, I think it is. In this location, you can see clearly sort of here, and then on this adjacent site here, they are much more contemporary in their approach, and actually they are single-storey buildings, so they're effectively set down beneath the road level of Pearly Rise. So they are more contemporary in their approach. They don't take that traditional form, and therefore these there is a sort of a mixed character emerging, and the properties which have formed part of the application you see before you tonight are more taking after that character.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Clowder?
Could the officer just put the slide up again to show the off-road parking and where those entrances are going to come out on, is it Pearly Rise? And is that being looked at in terms of you're going to have two kind of driveways in there? And I don't know that road, so I don't know how busy it is in terms of the traffic that would impact on those two entrances.
So the site is essentially proposed as a car-free development. So, sorry? Okay. So the site is proposed as a car-free development. Those two areas that I showed you are effectively courtyard amenity space, so outdoor space for the 2 units. And the larger unit, which is the 3-bedroomed, also has space in this location here, so to provide a greater amount of amenity space for the family-sized unit. So in highway terms, there isn't an issue in terms of 2 crossovers close together. As you see on this side of Purley Rise, at the moment there are no real properties which face onto that. There are designated car parking bays along that part of Purley Rise and along Purley Rise here, but bearing in mind the proximity of the site to Purley Town Centre and the station, it's considered that a car-free development in this location would be acceptable.
Okay, thank you. Interesting. Right, for no further questions, we have one person wishing to address us on this application, Mr Vincent, who is the applicant's agent and architect. So if Mr Vincent would like to make his way down, please. There are no objectors wishing to speak, and there are no referrals from ward members on this application. So, Mr Vincent, welcome back. You have 3 minutes, up to 3 minutes, to tell us about your application. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Nicola.
Microphone, that's it. No, not yet.
This one's better. Right, okay. Okay, so I don't want to go over too much that Nicola's already covered. So the scheme is the creation of 2 new family units in the rear of 36 Brighton Road, and there's a well-established precedent along the rear of the properties of Brighton Road. Numbers 34, 46, 50, etc. A quick overview of the planning that we went through. So we had a pretty successful, or very promising pre-application in March, and then we've got the current application now. So we've worked with the council throughout the process to develop a scheme that's addressed the concerns that were raised. And the 2 main concerns that have already been discussed today: impact on the trees and also the visual impact on Purley Rise and the general street scene. So I'll just quickly cover a couple of points of those. Trees, and arboricultural impact assessment was undertaken actually before the pre-application, and that informed the layout of the scheme. So the 2 L-shaped units avoid encroaching on the root protection areas of the mature trees along the curbs. In terms of tree loss, there are 6 Category C trees and 1 Category U tree which are going to be lost on the site. None of the substantial Category B trees are going to be affected, bar 1, and this can be mitigated by planting a new tree during the soft landscaping phase. In terms of the actual design, although number 34 Brighton Road, which was the image we saw earlier, the white rendered property, is quite a conventional house. The units further along to 4650 Brighton Road, you actually enter at street level onto the roof and then step down. So they're very contemporary in their appearance, and actually the established street scene that's emerging is actually one that's more varied than actually traditional in its appearance. A quick points on the design. So again, just to minimise the impact on the visual street scene. Obviously, topography allowed for a semi-basement, so a 2-storey building appears as 1.5 stories. By cladding the building in a dark timber, it visually recesses rather than the stark white render on the opposite side of the street. The green roof is there, so the houses on the opposite side of Purley Rise, which are a lot higher up, are looking down on to green roof. and then the actual boundary treatment will be substantially reinstated and retained.
Thank you very much. Bang on 3 minutes. Thank you. Okay, do the officers anything further to add on this application?
If I could just add just a couple of things, Chair, if I may. The first point is that we've worked very hard to make sure that these buildings face both sides of Purley Rise. I appreciate that the entrances are, let's say, within the courtyard gardens, but windows and security and being able to overlook the street was considered quite important, particularly at the the higher unit onto Purley Rise, but also onto the side elevations of both properties onto the return of Purley Rise. And the second point, I mean, I think we've had a lot of discussions about materials at pre-application as well as since the application was submitted. And as officers, we're satisfied with the materials, and therefore a condition has been recommended. A scheme should come forward in accordance with those drawings. But through debate, if there are any issues around materials, then there's no reason why a condition can't be imposed to require us to look further at those materials, if that's something that members, as part of your discussions, think that's important. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Well, we have a slightly unusual circumstance in so much that our colleagues from the Conservative Party have all felt that they need to step out from this application. But I'll open this now to the committee. Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. A contemporary design in a traditional context with no parking and a small amount of additional housing to our borough. I'm sure if our colleagues were on the committee, they would be supportive of it. So I would move approval. I think it's sufficient. We've had concerns about trees, but I think we've had those addressed, and let's move to pass it. Thank you.
Okay. I'll bring myself in. I have to say I have some concerns with this application. The modern design, I think, is fine, and the houses are interestingly designed. What I find disappointing is the way that they don't really address the street. And these feel more like units which are designed to sit and be hidden within the garden rather than actually address the actual local context. I'm not entirely convinced by having a pair of houses as well that actually works well. For me, the approach that's taken across the road, number 48, is a more appropriate way of actually developing this site. But I would be interested to hear more from colleagues what their particular views are. So I think the telling image for me, the disappointing image for me, was the perspective view. If we could maybe go back to that, Nicola. And in fact, colleagues, last time when we looked at this, when it came to the subcommittee, the feeling was very much that they felt like two large sort of garden buildings, garden sheds, rather than houses actually addressing the street. Colleagues, can I see any further comments? Councillor Kabir.
Actually, I agree with you because it doesn't look like a new developed. Maybe for good reason they try to hide it go with the character. But if you look at it, it's really doesn't go with the rest of the characters of that area, considering Brighton Road and Purley Rise. So I'm not convinced either. I think it should be a nice development where people would love to live there. It looks like a hidden, like somebody, like a children play house. I'm not going to support it.
Okay. Further comments? Councillor Prince.
Yes, I don't think I've seen this before. I don't think I was at planning subcommittee for that one. I too was a bit taken aback by this particular view. I'm not saying that we should never move over to modern buildings, and I don't know the area tremendously well, except for using the Tesco's and driving up and down Purley Way, Brighton Road. But it does jar. It does look to me like a couple of garden sheds. The developer mentioned the ones further down the road that these sort of reflect, but I got the impression that they were more out of sight, more at a lower level, and whereas this, it's going to be in the sight line of people opposite. Obviously, I'm all in favour of adding to the housing stock of the borough, but it does seem to jar on the existing, style and character of the street to me. Sorry, that's not very definitive. I still haven't made up my mind. That's just my feelings.
I think, to be honest, I think it's about, does this fit with the character of the area? Because it's a prominent site being on a corner. And I would have thought development here ought to be reflecting that position and actually be more positive, actually. Not try and sort of sit and hide behind the hedge and with the green roof to try and sort of mitigate it so it sort of disappears into the landscape. And so, on the grounds of failure to fit and sit comfortably with the character and reflect the character of the local area, and given the relationship of the units to the street, and as a result of those things, the design, which in another setting, I think would be perfectly good. I don't think this scheme works. I really don't. I respect the fact that there's no parking because it's a very high PTAL rating and the parking spaces on the road. I respect that the street trees have been protected and moves have been made to do this. But I think this needs to be looked at again to actually develop a scheme that's going to sit comfortably within the context and not something that is going to be too timid and to try to pretend it's two big garden sheds. If there's going to be a house or houses here, let's see them, let's celebrate them. So I'm going to move refusal. Councillor Clowder?
Thank you, Chair. I also don't think it's in keeping with the area. They do look a bit shed-like. I was looking at the previous applications, which was an erection of a four-storey house, which was approved, and that might have been a better design. So I would like to second your recommendation there.
Okay, do I see anybody else wishing to speak on this one? No? Councillor Kabir.
Yeah. Hopefully when it does come back, if it does come back again. So I like to see something that I can support. People who will be living there should be enjoying the similar character, similar feelings and environment as on the left-hand side. So that's my point. Thank you. I
think definitely there's clear development potential on this site. I think we're all recognising that. It's just that the scheme isn't there, it isn't pitched in the right sort of way in terms of that context to really make it work. Okay then, we've got the one motion completed before us, which was for refusal, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Clowder. I think the grounds, are those clear?
Yes, what I've noted down, Chair, is the scale, the form, and how the building addresses the street and its external appearance, fails to respect the character and appearance of the area.
Yeah, positively respond to the character of the area. Okay, can I see those in favour? Refusal? And those against? Abstention? Okay, so that is refused. And if our colleagues, they're at the back actually, if our colleagues could come back in, that would be appreciated. Because we'll now move on to item 6.1, which is Queen's Hotel. The presenting officer, I'll just give people a moment to return to the room. Presenting officer will be James White. And Councillor Chatterjee, you're over here. sorry, we changed around the seating pattern. So, okay, James, when you're ready, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I just thought I'd bring to members' attention that there's an addendum item linked to this planning application. So the application before you now is for Queen's Hotel, 122 Church Road, Upper Norwood. It's for the demolition of existing buildings to the centre and rear of the site and existing extensions on the roof. It involves the creation of a 530-room hotel with 170 vehicle parking spaces below ground. It involves the construction of a new spine building to the rear, including a glazed link to part of a retained Muse building. And it involves the extension to the southwest of the building and to the rear of the frontage building. It also involves recladding to a 1970s extension with a ground floor canopy and the provision of enhanced landscaping around, as well as changes to the vehicle access. So here you can see the application site edged in red. Over here. It's the Queen's Hotel. It's a locally listed building, predominantly in an L shape. It's set within the conservation area and has had a number of extensions and alterations over the year. Particularly notable are the 1970s extensions, which I'll come on to later. The building is generally between 2 and 6 stories across the whole of it, and the land slopes down from the front of the site to the rear. Moving outside of the site, you've got Fitzroy Gardens along here and the Fitzroy Gardens spur. This leads on to Wakefield Gardens towards the rear of the site, and they all have a shared communal private garden area. And to the north of the site, you've got a townhouse here, or a larger house here, and then to the rear, a 2-storey house, Silverton Cottage, and some 2-storey flats in this location. So this is a view showing the existing frontage. It's worth noting the lack of landscaping and trees to the front. Church Road is a very well tree-lined street. And also is worth noting here the extensions on the top of the building, but I'll talk about those later. So then this is a CGI view from the opposite angle. Again, you can see so this is the 1970s extension to the building, with the extensions on the top that have been made over previous years, and you've got an existing sort of blue canopies around to the front. So I've moved outside the site now, and I've gone to the north. On the bottom left, you've got the 2-storey Silverton Cottage, which abuts the boundary to the north, quite deep into the site. And then on the right over here, that's the entrance to the Silverton Cottage, and these are the 2-storey flats I was talking about. There's a lot of screening between those in the sites. And then hopping back over this north boundary, this is the existing service access road down the site. And you've got, as you can see the screening on the right. On the left, this is the 1970s extension, which actually does go quite far back into the site as well. And then I've moved into to the rear area here, which is a bit bleak. You've got the Muse building on the top left photo. Over here, you can see the Muse building with a collection of storage containers and bits and pieces and wooden huts in front. On the bottom photo here, you can see this is the rear of the sort of existing building, which has been added to with bits and pieces, ventilation, external staircases. There's a mix and match of windows and materials. And then you've, top right picture, I'm kind of looking back now towards the rear of the 70s extension and catching some of the existing building that you can see in this photo here. As I say, it's all looking a bit tired and ad hoc. So now moving back outside the site to the south side. So in the top photo, and across to the middle, I'm standing in the position roughly where the conservation area designation finishes. So behind this location is the conservation area. These houses in Fitzroy Gardens aren't in the conservation area. But I've taken this photo to try and show a view across to where the sort of the rear spine element would go, which would go through here, but obviously in the distance beyond the gardens, which are in the conservation area. So bottom left here, this is the spur, the Fitzroy Gardens spur that I mentioned at the beginning, and you can see the existing hotel comes down here. These are the three-storey houses, on Fitzroy Gardens, and all the houses on Fitzroy Gardens and Wakefield Gardens are similar design and height. Bottom middle, so this is, I'm in the garden of one of the houses in Wakefield Gardens, looking at the rear of the mews, and you can see it's kind of turned into a bit of a living green wall here. And there are some existing windows in this elevation, some hidden, some clear. And in this photo on the right, I'm standing in the private communal garden, looking towards the existing building, the existing rear of the hotel, which comes down towards the rear of the site, and you can see it's quite well covered by trees and whatnot. So moving on to the plans, on the left we've got the existing, and on the right we've got the proposed, and I've just taken an example slide of a lower ground level. So the pink rooms are the existing ones, and blue rooms here are the proposed ones. So you have vehicle access which comes down the side of the building and then turns and goes underground. You can also see here that there's space has been made for some extra landscaping along here, which you'll see a bit clearer later. And it's also worth pointing out that the mews area here has been retained. As you can see, that element has been retained. And that was a change during the course of the application. Originally, that was all going to be removed, except for the very rear wall, but now that's all being kept. Obviously, again, during the course of the application, the basement has been pulled further away. That's highlighted in the report. And there's confirmation that all the windows on the rear are going to be obscure glazed and fixed shut. This is also probably a good slide to talk about the phasing, which is obviously quite an important aspect of the scheme. I recall members saying that obviously the goodies had to be secured early. So, in fact, actually, I'll use a slide 2 along. It's a better slide. I do apologise, but this slide just shows the continuation of the ramp down and towards the basement. Another useful, I want to go back to this slide here. Another useful element about this slide is the difference in the usability of the hotel itself. So this one here, you can see it's very awkward, it's unusual, it's cramped, it's difficult to get around. Obviously, the new proposed scheme, you have a nice long, clear corridors, which is great for a safety aspect when you're using it, security, but also manoeuvrability for wheelchairs, and obviously there's lifts that come up from the disabled parking into the hotel, and there's accessibility throughout. I've spoken about that slide, so this is the better slide to talk about the phasing. So again, you've got the existing on the left, where you've got an awful lot of car parking to the front. In fact, and then you've got a vehicle access that comes in this side. You then would travel through the site, through the frontage, across where the pedestrian link is, and then out of this side here. So moving across onto the proposed ground floor plan, you can see here that the frontage has been completely removed of permanent car parking. You just have some drop-off bays here, some coach parking to the front, which can come in and out safely, and then a much wider area for landscaping, which is again a follow-up from the members' presentation, where there was a suggestion that more could be done to the front. So I've lost my mouse here. There's a couple of zip car spaces here for public use, more landscaping here. Again, over this side, this is where you can see where the landscaping really comes in. So you'll have a line of landscaping within the site, and again, this element here is all the landscaping within the private gardens. There's this strip here, which is it's part of the private gardens, but it's pretty open, and it kind of uses a bit of a storage area. So this is also useful to show the relationship with number 18, which is probably one of the closest properties. At the moment, you've got a 14-metre gap, and there's a clear window there. Now, the building has been pushed back, which allows for some of the landscaping, and it's gone to just over 16 metres, and the windows have been angled this way, so there isn't any overlooking. But using this middle plan to talk about the phasing, so phase 1 would be just a dining extension to the rear. Phase 2 involves the south extension plus all the frontage improvements and the elements to remove the canopy in the top of the building, remove the extension. Phase 3 is located basically the whole rear sort of spine element, and phase 4 is the recladding. So all the improvements to the front are in an early phase in phase 2. Obviously, the potential concern is the recladding is in a later phase. However, we will link that to the section 106 to make sure that shortly after commencement of phase 3, they have to start the cladding on phase 4, and then they have to complete the cladding on phase 4 before a certain percentage of the rooms they can't be occupied until that's done, and it's about 63 rooms, and that's highlighted in the addendum. That's been run past the applicant and agent, and they're happy to enter into that. So the goodies will come early. Oh, sorry, I skipped one there. So this is the proposed front elevation. Obviously, the top is the existing, and the beneath is the bottom one is the proposed. It's useful to point out here, that's the south extension. You've got the recladded element to the north of the 1970s extension. It's been pushed back at the top, the canopy's gone. This element here has been pushed back, and it's a much better view later on. I've got a CGI which shows that better. And also some windows have been included in there, which is another change throughout the course of the application, which was strongly welcomed by Historic England to help with vertical alignment. Obviously, the canopies are gone, which were suggestions made at the development presentation as well. Materials, there's two main materials on the new extensions. There's a buff brick and a bronze anodized aluminium panel, but I will come on to those a bit later. But they are sympathetic, which provides a clear and appropriate contrast to the historic building. So this is the side elevation, obviously again existing on the top, proposed on the lower section. This drops down. It variously changes between 4 and 6 stories. You see the dining extension there, and this is the retained mews along this section here. So this is a view along the Wakefield Gardens spur, existing arrangement. And then we've got the proposed massing. So you can see the blue line is the existing. Some further massing has been reduced off this area here again through the course of the application in response to various concerns raised by various different third parties. And over on the right, it just shows the idea between the landscaping to try and get it up quite a few stories high to add that extra bit of density to the landscaping, although, as I say, there is some existing in the communal gardens. So this just provides a bit more information on the sort of materiality. You've got a buff brick element here, and then set slightly behind that is the bronze aluminium cladding, and then recessed beyond that are the windows. So there's some good levels of depth there to provide a bit of interest. Where the windows are obviously on the brick, it's a much deeper punch into the wall to provide a solid appearance. And then there's also elements throughout where there's a bit of interest. They've used the bricks to play a bit subtly, and that's an example of it. So you've got the Flemish bonding with the headers stepped in to create a bit of shadow and light. So moving on to the CGIs. So this is one that's taken from or done from within the garden, looking diagonally back towards the hotel and the rear extensions. So this is the one we saw at the beginning. It's worth noting here the roof extension here, obviously all the 1970 extension, the blue canopies and the limited landscaping. And then this is the proposed from the same angle. So you can really see there are some changes there which certainly enhance the conservation area from the officer's perspective. That's also been supported by the GLA, and obviously Historic England are happy with the scheme now. What you can't see from this is the hard landscaping along the front would be dramatically improved. It's just tarmac and white lines all over it. That would be an upgrade on that. And also, what you can't tell from any of the plans or drawings that I've shown you is the socio-economic regenerational benefits. Obviously, there's going to be 100 new jobs. There's going to be a lot of people, more people using this. All those people will be going into the district centre, which is a very short walk along the road, using the bars, the cafes, the restaurants. And Crystal Palace is a lovely place, but it would certainly add a level of vibrancy. And that is the end of the presentation, and it's recommended for approval. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Questions, clarification? Councillor Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to talk about the amenity area, could you tell us more detail how it's going to work, how it's going to be managed, and are you happy about the security aspects of it?
Oh, sorry. I may have slightly confused you. This amenity area here is for the residents of Fitzroy Gardens and Wakefield Gardens. That does not form part of this application. So, future hotel guests wouldn't use this. That's separate from the hotel. There are, though, a lot of parks very close. There's Westhoe Park just behind, and then there's Crystal Palace Park. So there's plenty of outdoor space for any guests should they wish to use it.
And so you're happy about the security?
Yes, absolutely, yeah.
So essentially there's no change to that private park area, garden area. It stays the same. And does that also count for the planting along the edge? And we saw in the earlier photographs there was a substantial amount of planting. Will that all be retained?
Yeah, there's no trees to be lost, and the ones outside the site will be protected. The building has even been moved back to allow for that, and to also allow another layer of planting to thicken that up, so an improvement in terms of landscaping all around.
I understand that those gardens were originally part of the hotel grounds.
You're correct, they were, and all the land where the Fitzroy Gardens and Wakefield Gardens houses are was also all part of the hotel, but part of the hotel was demolished on the south side, provide access through to build all the houses. So yeah, as I say, it has been dramatically changed since it was first constructed.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Tracus-Lawler, then I've seen Councillor Perry and Councillor Audsley and Councillor Prince.
Thank you very much, Chair. James, could you take us back to the slide where we see the entrance into the proposed underground car park? Okay. Yeah, the one after. Yeah, that's the one. Now, presumably it's where those 4 green dots are. That's where the proposed entrance will be. Is that big enough for a coach to get in?
Sorry. No, because the coaches will only be to the front of the site. Any extra coaches that may turn up would be parked off-site, and there would be a legal agreement entered into, agreed by the applicant, to secure a coach management parking plan, which has been agreed by TfL and our highway officer. So to answer your question, to the rear, no it doesn't, but there is plenty of space for car parking, including disabled car parking and some vans as well if needs be.
Is it worth just saying something about the coach parking? Because I understand there's only 3 coach parking spaces on site, but some arrangement is being proposed for parking off-site as well. Could you say a little bit about that?
Yes, so obviously, as you can see, there's only room for 3 on site. If any more were to turn up at the same time, after drop-off, there's a coach parking management plan which would enable and insist that they park off-site. 5 locations have already been identified. One of those is just down the road, Crystal Palace Football Stadium. That will be secured, by a legal agreement. Although it was suggested by TfL that could be secured by condition, we've actually gone one step further and to secure it by legal agreement, so it can't be appealed against.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Perry.
Thank you very much, Chairman. 2 questions. The first was around the CGIs, again from the gardens. Do we have any CGIs in the winter months? Because these are all sort of summer lots of trees in bloom, very green. Do we have any non-green sort of CGIs?
I don't have any other CGIs, I'm afraid.
And my other question was about the coach parking. We've heard that Crystal Palace or Selhurst Park is one of those. Where are the other 4 sort of overflow parking facilities?
Sure. So you've got Kangley Bridge Road, which is 3.4 kilometres away. You've got Streatham Road, which is 4.7 kilometres away. And then you've got 2 bus garages about 6 to 7 kilometres away. That's kilometres, not miles as well, which is completely reasonable.
Presumably for large hotels, I mean, obviously there's lots of, we see sort of large hotels in central Croydon, in central London, or whatever, don't often have lots of coach parking. So is this quite a common sort of arrangement that they'd have a coach park somewhere else and the coaches would arrive when they're needed?
Absolutely. I mean, there's some hotels in London that don't have any coach parking at all, and that's exactly what would happen. They would have management plans for this. In this case, they've got space for 3, so that works. That's an improvement on some. But it's certainly common, and as I say, it will be legally secured.
And what about if are we confident that we've got enough teeth in the agreement that we're actually putting in place here so that people don't start parking coaches in Fitzroy Gardens or whatever around the back or along the street?
Absolutely. It manages the whole process from telling them before that they can only park and drop off if no spaces. They have to go to one of the designated spaces. We'll also have a slightly separate issue, but there's also potentially money for a residents' parking scheme if there is any issues down the line, a review later, and the money could be used for that. Again, that would also could factor across with the coach parking. And again, there's a travel plan as well to encourage people actually to come on public transport.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a bit to that in terms of the enforceability of Section 106 agreements. The importance of capturing this through a Section 106 agreement is that it's legally enforceable. And if there is a breach of that Section 106 agreement, and there will be, if with this coach travel plan, that will be written down, that will be agreed, and it's agreed by the developer rather than as a condition that can be appealed against. And that can be enforced through the courts if it needs be. So, I mean, obviously that's the last resort, but that agreement can be negotiated and enforced. And if there are problems with that coach management plan for whatever reason, then that can be dealt with quite robustly through the Section 106 process.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Audley.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, the proposal is to get rid of the blue canopy, which we had commented on previously, but I wasn't quite kind of sure the detail of what replaced it. So I just wonder if we might have a look at that again, or describe the kind of feature that is some kind of entrance canopy, but I couldn't quite get a grasp, so that might be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It's a fairly lightweight structure to try and allow views through towards the hotel. As you can see, the view before, it blocks a lot of that. So again, it's about transparency and celebrating the frontage. And it would just be, I don't know the materiality exactly, but we do have a condition to secure the canopy features. So when they submit the finer details and the materials, we'll make sure it's high quality. But the idea of the new canopy, new entrance was to allow as many views through to show off the frontage, the main frontage. As you can see, it's obscured and open.
Just as it prompted my mind, like in principle, did we have any power to get rid of it entirely if we didn't like it? I was just kind of coming through.
I think one finds with hotels, particularly if you've got baggage and whatever, that a storm porch or something to shelter from the rain when a car turns up or a taxi turns up is a fairly standard feature. What we've been seeking to do is to have as much of a lightweight structure as possible, whilst recognising that people might want to shelter from inclement weather until a cab turns up or whatever.
Understood, but just on the principle of it, if we didn't like it, could we say we don't want it?
At this stage, the proposal is for the storm or that structure, and that's what's before us this evening. I think if there's concern about that, then we will need to have further discussions with the applicant about that, I would suggest.
It's probably also worth pointing out, in terms of the functionality of it and the protection, there will be a small glazed platform for wheelchairs to come up here. So then when they enter in, they'll have some protection whilst, just sort of closing the door and stuff. So I think it's a sensible and functional requirement.
I mean, presumably, it's quite possible, and I dare say there are photographs to show if this is the case or not, that the original building would have had sort of entrance porch, something similar to what's being proposed, or indeed it wouldn't be unusual for a building of that age to have that kind of thing, a coach sort of drop-off point, literally an old-style coach originally.
I do have photos of the original building. I can't recall off the top of my head if it's there. However, this building has been substantially altered along the time. And I think, as I say, the function of it and the crispness and the cleanness of it works well. And as I say, it's all part of the plan application to be approved.
Okay. I think this is one of these situations where we actually are asking for a very detailed design to be submitted, like sort of 1 to 5, very big sort of details and all that kind of stuff, so that it can be looked at very closely. Is that the case?
Absolutely, yeah. Certainly, that's already in my draft conditions.
It's sort of one of the advantages of it being a conservation area, I guess, is you can actually ask for those sorts of details to a much greater extent than
well, we always seek high-quality design in Croydon, so I'd ask for that on applications all over, Councillor.
All right, fine, good. That's what I like to hear. Councillor Prince?
Yes, thank you, Chair. 2 or 3 issues for clarification, please. Condition 12 in the original paper says use of gyms, swimming pool, restaurant, dining areas and bar by hotel residents only. And I was going to ask, what is the thinking behind that? Because at first sight, they would look like sort of useful facilities for the local area. And then the addendum changes that slightly in that those facilities shall become ancillary to hotel use. So I don't understand what the difference is and what the thinking behind the restriction in the first place is. And I've got a couple of other issues, but perhaps that one first. Thank you.
So they're fairly small, the gym and the swimming pool, as you talk about. And really, it's just to make sure they are used in connection with the hotel. That's basically it. So they can't be hired off separately or sliced off. It will, if someone comes in to use the hotel, they can use the facilities. I think perhaps it was badly worded, the first iteration condition, and I sort of cleared that up.
So essentially, are you saying they couldn't set up a sort of private health club, which had a swimming pool and a gym? Those facilities have to be there for the use of the people staying in the hotel?
Yeah,
is that the case?
To use hotel, have to use those. Yeah, you couldn't have someone setting up like you say, a separate entity. Okay.
Councillor Prince, you had a couple more points?
Yes, I was going to ask about disabled access, if somebody could talk. You mentioned the wheelchair lifting, but it would be nice to hear more about disabled access in general. And then lastly, getting back to the canopy, I think those of us who were at the pre-app, it's the sort of large acres of blue plastic that are there at the moment that we really don't like. And is there any guarantee that for the future there won't be any sort of tasteless additions like that? Thank you.
Although that addition was approved by the council, anything else would need subsequent would need planning permission, and obviously subject to the consultation, it could come before yourselves or not. I'd certainly would like to think that it's looking fantastic, and you wouldn't want to add a blue canopy on it now. Your previous point about disabled access, obviously you've got. I just sort of mentioned the sort of subtle glass framed platform lift up here to get into the. So this section here to get into the frontage, which obviously is a major problem at the moment. And then going back here, this was the best one. So obviously if you're driving in, you can come around here and you park. There's a whole floor of the wheelchair spaces, very close to the lift in the basement, which comes up to here. Then you can come along here, and there's also another mini lift because there's a lot of different land changes in this, and that takes you into the main dining area. So it's been thought about all the way through. At the moment, it's a nightmare to get around, especially walking, let alone being in a wheelchair. Then the other point is that there's a number of larger disabled rooms, as wheelchair type rooms. I think it's on the front. I think it's 10%. I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah. And there's also some larger family rooms as well. But anyway.
So so essentially, if you arrive at this hotel and you're in a wheelchair, you could enter through the same door as everybody else because there'll be one of those sort of little lifts that goes up next to the stairs, and then you'll be able to get round all of the facilities and through to a good number of rooms that are usable, adapted and the right size and layout for people in wheelchairs. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, it's always tricky with disabled access on a locally spin on a conservation area because you either go for something that's not mechanical and you have a huge ramps out the front, or you go for something that's mechanical. And this, I think they've done a very good job in making sure it's subtle, so everyone goes through the same front door if needs be, or around the back. Everyone will come up in the same lift and along platform. So there's no segregation. There's no people coming in back doors or side doors. It's been well thought through. And as I say, they're nice and wide, and you can see all the way through. So that sort of question about safety and security, I mean, that's sort of inbuilt into the design.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clowder.
Thank you, Chair. My question's on the traffic impact assessment. And we've had the discussion about the coaches and the dropping off. We've got 170 parking places, so we've also got staff parking, we'll have taxis dropping off, and a whole range of delivery vehicles that will be delivering goods there. So I kind of want a sense of what the outcome of that assessment was in terms of taking all those things into consideration, because it's not really in the report.
So in terms of deliveries, there'll be a delivery servicing plan, and there's a sort of
I know that's it's a busy road, and that's going to be a lot of traffic, additional traffic on that road with all the things I've just mentioned. So it's particularly about the impact assessment. Sorry.
Yeah, so the trip assessments... sorry. Okay. We have a highway officer who can go into a bit more detail if needs be, but the trip assessments showed that there would be an acceptable amount of traffic created, and we'd have a conditioned delivery service plan, so that element of the scheme would be well catered for, and there's a sort of a dedicated area that isn't near the parking and that isn't at the front. It's kind of halfway down where that can be carried out. There would be a car park management scheme as well to make sure everyone knows what's happening before they turn up, where they need to drive, so they won't be sort of wandering around looking for the entrances. They'll know all about that, and a system to operate that. In terms of the flow along the road, the scheme does actually propose the removal of some of the there's like 4 or 5 bays along the front will actually do interrupt some of the flow along Church Road. So there'll be a legal requirement for them to enter into it's called a Section 278 agreement, highway agreement, to have those removed, and any works obviously will be paid by the developer. There's also be a travel plan to push towards, public transport to use or to get to the site, and I think that was most of your questions.
I'll just sort of build on the question a little bit. I think part of the sort of question there really was and concern was about, it's a busy road. If this development is consented and built, would you get a sense of it being busier? Or will the additional traffic actually be so relatively modest that you won't really notice that much of a change?
It is a busy road, so the increase in this would be negligible in relation to the amount of traffic that goes up and down Church Road. So that was the trip assessments, which sort of look into that, has been agreed by TfL and our own highway officers.
Sorry, Chair. Yes, I think the other thing to, and maybe Mr Burton might want to come in on this as well, but the interesting thing around, when you're in central London in a hotel, then most people are clearly come by public transport. They very rarely come by coach because of the nature of the beast of central London hotels. This is obviously not in central London, and it'll have a mixed bag of people that will be arriving maybe by public transport. It's also a good place, as we know, Croydon is well located in terms of getting into central London, so people might come by coach and then use public transport to get into central London. They might use their coach and have coach tours because, again, this will attract people, coach tours, and that's why the coach travel plan and the coach management plan is quite important. But they might have people that come by car and keep their car in the car park and will then use public transport to get around. So I think to assume that everybody's going to come by car is not really going to be the case, and I think that ties down to understanding how the trips work and how people will use this hotel. And I think the other thing for me is that the whole nature of this hotel and the way in which it's coming forward as a more comprehensive approach rather than the piecemeal approach of extensions and how it works, I think encourages me that the nature of this hotel and how it will work in the future will change quite dramatically in terms of how people will use it. I don't know whether Ron wants to add to that or...
Yes, agree with what Pete Smith said. I think the other factor is that for hotels, the peak traffic arrival and departure times tend to be outside the normal traffic peaks, morning and evening rush hour. People can't tend to check in until early afternoon. They have to check out by late morning. So you tend to find most of the movements associated with the hotel are during the middle of the day when the traffic peaks on the surrounding roads aren't so bad. We have had a full assessment done where they used traffic tripper generation data to determine the volumes of traffic, and as has been previously said, in terms of the percentage change on the road, given how busy the road already is, it will almost be negligible. They've also predicted that there will be up to 8 coach trips a day to the hotel. So there's parking for 3 coaches. So the management plan will ensure that all coaches are pre-booked, so that there's never more than 3 on site at any one time. But if you equate 8 coaches with 50 people to a coach, that's a fair proportion of the rooms taken up by prospective coach travel. We've allowed a car park that probably is larger than the normal standard. I think that's more in recognition of the concerns of local residents who are concerned about the surrounding streets being heavily parked by hotel users. So the car park is quite large for a hotel of this size in this location.
Thank you for that explanation. That's very
It's
helpful.
probably worth pointing out that the car parking was agreed by TfL, and if there's a resolution to grant, it would have to go back to the GLA for stage 2 consideration, and they would obviously determine, sort of instruct us how to proceed after that, and again it will be looked at by Transport for London.
Councillor Orsi, did you want to come on that particular point?
Just building on that, because the conversation we're having here about this one, obviously we've got some kind of data about coach trips, but whether there's any existing data about kind of percentage of visitors arriving by car or other modes of transport, again, just to try and give us a greater feel for that. I just wondered if there was any data, be it walking or be it the train or...
Yeah, I mean, that would be helpful. And I mean, presumably this is sort of calculated on sort of a historic sort of data sort of basis fed into a computer and it comes up with an answer?
That's correct, Chair. There's a system called TRIX which has data from various land uses from all over the country. So developers will go into that programme and pick similar sites to the one that they're developing in terms of its accessibility, the size of the site, the amount of parking provided, etc. And from that you can predict the various trips by all modes of transport. So that would be walking, cycling, public transport and by car. So from that you're able to compare the existing situation based on the size of the current hotel with the predicted increase in size, and that's how it's all been calculated.
Councillor Audley, does that answer your question?
I mean, I guess it does. I mean, what we're hearing is the kind of the summary there, negligible impact on road use. But I was just interested for our own kind of heads hearing it, and indeed members of the public there listening in, whether we could, in a sense, 10% travelled by X, 20% travelled by Y. Whether you could just do you have a headline you could give us of 20% will arrive by coach, 10% will arrive by foot, 30% will arrive by train, for example?
I don't have that data with me. It was provided. The percentage of car parking is about 30% in terms of the number of spaces to the ratio of rooms. I can't remember the figures for all the other modes of transport, but that 30% is what we consider to be acceptable. The current hotel only has enough parking for 20% to come by car. But the trip generation data they produced showed that 30% is what the requirement would be, and that's the level of parking we're providing. So the other 70% will arrive by other means, quite a large proportion by coach, as I've said, with up to 8 coaches a day. That's 400 people at 2 a room is 200 rooms with people coming by coach. The rest would probably come to local stations, come on by taxi or by public transport.
Worth mentioning that obviously a lot of people will be walking, not necessarily there to check in, but walking around to the extent where TfL and ourselves requested a contribution towards improving signage in the area, legible London signage of £25,000. So, and again, the developers are happy to pay that, and that will be secured by the legal agreement.
Sorry, moving on to a different question, if I may. Or
I'll bring you back in a minute.
Yeah, sure.
Because I've got other people who have already indicated.
Of course, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Kabir.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering, apart from the local creation of some new jobs, what is there for local community? You can't access the swimming pool, you can't access the gym, things like that. If you look in Central Croydon Hotel, for example, somebody can pay a fees and enjoy their swimming pool and gym, but it's not happening over there. So I'm just wondering, because that's not really right. This is not acceptable, so should be some access, I can understand why this was negotiated earlier.
Okay. Do we have a decision on that? I mean, presumably it would be up to the operator. I mean, some hotels will let you can pay to go into the various facilities, and like the bar and the restaurant and all that kind of stuff. Do we know at this stage whether that's something that's been discussed with the developer? Is that something that we couldn't really at this stage sort of secure?
It's really the management of the hotel. But for example, if someone wants to come in and have a drink at the bar, there's nothing stopping them coming and have a drink at the bar. I don't know if they would come in and then use the swimming pool because it's not particularly big, especially when you've got Crystal Palace swimming pool around the corner. So, but the improvements, I mean, just the frontage is a massive improvement, and that would certainly lift the area. You've got the contributions for, as I said, legible London signage, which is a direct improvement. The ratio of car parking has gone up per room, so there would be potentially less parking on the streets, which seems to be something that's been raised in third-party correspondence.
And I think, Chair, if I can add to that, as I say, the other issue is the employment and training, with the construction of this scheme, and we're following on from members' comments at pre-application, we've engaged with this, job brokerage arrangement whereby local people can have more opportunity to bid for jobs. So I think more widely, the regeneration that this project provides for Crystal Palace or for Upper Norwood will actually feed into the local economy, but actually, hopefully, we'll get that critical mass to continue to enhance the district centre. And I think, whilst that's, if you like, an indirect benefit for local residents, it's something that I don't think should be forgotten about.
And that job brokerage is for the construction period of, as well as the operation. So a commitment to getting local people trained up and employed. And there's a contribution has been would be secured on that as well as these commitments.
Just so we're clear, when we mean local, are we talking Croydon or are we talking Upper Norwood, or what do we mean by that, just so we hear it? Thank you.
Croydon, London Borough of Croydon.
I mean, just for context, some people may not see that as local.
Okay, fine, thank you. Councillor Wimborne.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm concerned about Fitzroy Gardens, which is very close. Could you confirm that there's going to be a daylight and sunlight assessment? And second question, are there going to be any electric charging points on site?
A daylight and sunlight assessment has been done, and there's no detrimental impacts to the neighbour. I think that's partly, as you can see, some of it's been pulled away from the closest one, which was number 18, Fitzroy Gardens, which I mentioned earlier. Obviously, the mews at the back is all being kept now, so there's no change to the occupiers to the rear. So officers are very satisfied with that element of the scheme. The electric charging points, yes, 20% in situ, another 20% passive provision, in line with TfL standards, and would be secured by condition.
Okay, so none of the housing at all will be overshadowed or have reduced sunlight or daylight?
Not sufficiently to warrant a refusal reason.
Okay, fine. Thank you. And who have we got next? Councillor Trackers-Lawler.
Thank you very much, Chair. My question is around community engagement. Now, this is in my ward. There have been significant problems with parking, particularly in Fitzroy and Wakefield, and not just those roads, along Church Road, Stambourne Way, and all the roads off of Church Road. Do you know what engagement, community engagement, the developer or the hotel has undertaken with the local community?
There has been a number of pre-application meetings where they've obviously been in the public, so that it's been open to everyone, but also they've directly spoken to some of the local residents and groups, and they've charted that in a timeline in their design and access statement, recording all the various meetings. Secondly, they've spoken to them during the course of this planning application, hence why there was a bit of a delay. There was some dramatic changes to the scheme to improve the privacy aspect to the Wakefield Gardens, as well as keeping the whole Mews building at the rear, most of the Mews building at the rear, which shows engagement and communication and embracing sort of the interplay between local residents and the applicant agent. In terms of the car parking, obviously the ratio has gone up now, so there's more space on site for that car parking now. If there is an issue secured in the legal agreement, after phase 3, because there's a fair number of rooms there, we'd look for a review to be done on the surrounding roads. And again, after phase 4, if there appears to be parking issues, then there's a pot of money which the council can pull, which would have been paid by the developer. It's £20,000, I think, which has been agreed with our parking services team. So that's an acceptable amount to carry this out, as well as implement it if needs be. And it would be a sort of a residence parking permit scheme. So then, obviously, the residents would then have access to those spaces and not any guests that may turn up and not park on site.
Okay, Councillor Chatterjee.
Thank you very much. Builds a little bit upon what Councillor Traxlola was just asking. One of the 3 questions I wanted to ask was really about the problem of if there is extra parking, even if there were some sort of parking permit system in Fitzroy, then inevitably there would be people who'd be driving down there having a look to see in case there was somewhere to park, and then they turn down and come back again. So the mere fact that there would be possibly, foreseeably in the future, a parking permit scheme in one or more adjacent roads doesn't obviate, get rid of, or otherwise dispose of the problem to local residents and any services wanting to get to those roads because of speculative journeys by members of the public who are residents at the hotel or visiting the hotel. So I'm really asking, in this context, what happens in that situation?
So, in that situation, if that was apparent, we would have there's a car parking management plan, again, secured by legal agreement instead of condition, whereby even before anyone books, they'll be notified and told, you don't park on these roads, you come into the car parking space. As I say, if they do eventually, then we have these reviews in place to assess that. If it is still causing an issue, then, as I say, there would be residence parking permit schemes. So anyone coming along couldn't then park in there, depending on the timelines, of course. It's a question that's a few steps in the future, and we don't know how it plays out now, but there's certainly a lot of obstacles to stop that happening put in place now.
Thank you. That obviously would be the kind of thing we're likely to be discussing a bit later on in terms of this application. A primary thing before that is that the residents would be expected to pay for their car parking spaces. For the 170 or so spaces, they would be charged something from the hotel to park there. Would that be correct?
So the guests that would stay in the hotel, there would be a fee to stay in the hotel, but that's for the hotel guests. Whether are you saying residents outside would then no? Okay.
No, it was just to establish that there would be a reason for many guests at the hotel to do exactly what Councillor Trexler has just said about street parking. There'd be an incentive to exactly do that.
I mean, the aim is this is a high-quality hotel. People will be, it's not unusual to have a parking charge for a hotel, so it's not out of the question. And again, the car park management plan would oversee that.
Sorry, just to clarify the situation here, is it within our gift to say that people staying at the hotel would be able to stay there for free in terms of the car parking use of the car parking spaces?
No, the resident. Sorry.
Or would it be unreasonable for us to actually say that? Because I mean, I know a lot of hotels. If you drive there, you don't pay anything. Some you do. I mean, it varies from place to place. But are we in a position to be able to say that to avoid on-street parking and to encourage the use of the on-site parking provision, that we could actually say, well, actually, the hotel shouldn't discourage the use of their own car park by putting an additional charge on its use?
That was raised during pre-applications. That wasn't something that the hotel, it's a revenue that they need to finance a lot of this as well. So that wasn't accepted by them. I think it would be unreasonable to do that. It's not uncommon at all across London. So.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to ask two other questions. One is, do we have roughly an average stay, if there are projected average stay for the residents? So I'm just thinking at this point about the guests at the hotel, whether or not they would be there for average of 2 days, 4 days, 7 days, because if they were there for a shorter period of time, there'd be more churning of car parking, and therefore new guests would come along and investigate Fitzroy and other roads nearby to park.
I don't have an average stay of numbers. It's probably impossible to predict that going forward.
Thanks very much. And the other one is about the methodology. I think Mr. Burton mentioned about, is it Trix, the software used to kind of project what the behaviour is likely to be in the future. Could you say something about the methodology of that? Because obviously validation of all sorts of systems is done not just to predict the future, but afterwards to see that it's actually worked. Have you looked into the methodology of Trix, or do you know if papers have been written about it which could be referred to?
Well, Trix is basically a database which has been developed over probably the last 10, 15 years. They do a programme of surveys at different land use sites in different locations throughout the country every year, and they continue to build on the database So if you look at historical sites, you will find that maybe 10 years ago, the traffic generation for a site that they've surveyed again 10 years later, or a similar site, is totally different because travel patterns have changed, levels of car ownership have changed, people are encouraged more to use sustainable transport. So depending on locations, there are changes, and the programme is constantly being updated every year with new sites and new developments to keep the programme up to date. When a developer comes to us, they will do a transport assessment, they will put in their criteria, so it may be number of rooms, accessibility of the site, whether it's town centre, edge of town location. There's a number of factors they can enter into the database, and then it comes up with a list of sites, and they go through those and they pick the ones which they think are most appropriate to the application they're looking at. They submit that to us, and then we check those sites to make sure we're happy that they are representative for the location within the borough where they're doing the development. And so it's constantly being updated, and obviously as sites get older we tend to disregard those because they're too historical.
Thank you. So TRIX covers both traffic and parking.
Yes, TRIX does a survey of all travel modes to a site and parking accumulation. So you can even get data on the people coming into the car parks during the course of a day for each hour in terms of the numbers in, number out. And depending on the type of application, you can build an accumulation graph which shows the peak occupation of the car park, what time of the day it would be, and how it tails off and builds up as the day goes on.
So would it be fair to say it's probably the most comprehensive way of assessing the travel data for this kind of development? There's no sort of better way of actually doing it other than building it and standing there with a counter or something.
Yes, Chair. I mean, I think the only other better way possibly could have been for them to have done a survey of the existing hotel and then factor it up for the proposal. I think the problem is that the way the hotel's used at the moment is not the way they see it being used when the development is taking place. So I don't think a survey of the current usage would give us a true representation of what will be happening.
That on the basis that I think we discussed this, if I recall correctly, last time when this came to pre-app, that whilst there isn't a star rating sort of associated with it, there's looking to upgrade it so it's a higher star rating than it is at the moment. So which would mean that people would use, different people would be there and they'd be using it a different way. That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Orsley wants to come back? No. Okay. I've just got a couple of questions myself. In terms of the sort of design concept, would I be right in thinking that the idea is that the two wings on the frontage are designed to be quite sort of simple, quite sort of plain but high quality in terms of sort of materials and detailing, so they don't sort of conflict with or take away from the design of the existing building? So that stays as like the feature building, or buildings actually, because there's a series of different building sort of extensions. Secondly, from my reading of the report, Historic England are more than happy with the proposals and see this as being a very positive development in terms of particularly the overcladding and changes to the 1970s, the awful 1970s extension. I think actually the perspective views probably don't do it quite enough disjustice in terms of the improvement that would actually be delivered through this. Is that the case? Also, are Historic England content with the loss of the whole series of extensions and bits and pieces of buildings that are at the back?
In terms of the Historic England, yeah, they're very much in favour of this. Again, they were brought in for conversations during the course of the application, again showing the engagement of the developer. And they're quite content now, and they're happy for specialist officers at Croydon to take over.
Fine. And then finally, obviously we have a policy that suggests that any hotels with more than 50 beds would be in a district centre. Here we have the situation where this hotel is already significantly bigger than that anyway, and it was here probably about, well, at least 100 years or so before the planning system was ever developed. So it sort of slightly oddly sort of sits outside of that policy. Are we content, though, that actually for an enlargement of the hotel, that's reasonable in terms of the history of the situation, irrespective of the policy circumstance?
Yes, absolutely. They also have submitted a sequential test to demonstrate it's a suitable area for the extensions to take place, using the same methodology that was approved by members a couple of years ago on a different extension.
If I can add to the points on the heritage, just if I may, Chair. Yes, we feel that the pallet materials and the sort of, if you like, the sort of a relatively simple approach to the two flanks of the main building itself will act as a good foil and a good comparison, and will actually sort of contribute positively, but still respect the original building and actually work quite well. They're both bookends as well, both of the two extensions either side. I don't know whether Mr Selby, who's been working tirelessly on the design, might comment a bit further on that, if I may.
I just echo what my colleagues said. We're very confident that it's a vast improvement on the existing, but also it brings back a sense of symmetry. The materials are, whilst they're simple, they're very robust, and there's an elegance to them, and also work's already begun to be done, and the quality of the brickwork, very much a handmade type of brick that gives a real interest and kind of good texture at the smaller scale when you're closer up to the building. And then as you step back at the larger scale, the mixture of brick detailing with the recesses, as James was mentioning earlier, and the detailing of the bronze metal finishes again complement the existing and showcase that central locally listed facade.
All right, thank you very much. Councillor Cecchi.
So just another quickie. Just trying to clarify, the maximum tenancy period, is that 90 days or is it 42 days? I know there have been some... do I mean 42? Yes, I mean 42. 90 days or 42 days, please?
90. In 2.1 of the committee report, item E, it restricts the maximum to 90 days.
I understand that I think we've probably all seen, or most of us have seen, the correspondence from the Local Residents Association or Residents Group suggesting a series of amendments or additions to the conditions. And I think one of those was to reduce the maximum stay to 42.5. I'm not quite sure how 42.5 days works, but anyway, 42.5 days. And there was some correspondence that said that had actually been accepted by the applicant. Are we aware of that?
No, there was a letter from a solicitor on behalf of the Wakefield Gardens Action Group, which suggested 5 conditions as well as a legal obligation. The 5 conditions related to further protection in terms of making sure windows were fixed shut on that rear elevation of the mews, obscured, no ventilation, poking out, or at least set back 5 metres, and a few other bits which have been summarised in the addendum. I've since spoken to the agent applicants, and they're willing to accept the principle of all of those points. And the element about the legal agreement was in relation to a liaison group, setting up a liaison group. But that wouldn't pass one of the 3 points, legal points. It wouldn't be necessary to make the development acceptable. So we couldn't add that one on, even if the applicant was willing to accept it, which they would be. But it would be unlawful.
I think the other point on that, though, is that on a standard construction logistics plan and a considerate constructor arrangements, one would expect that, and it's standard practice in a construction logistics plan and how a contractor works with their neighbours, particularly on a project like this, which is quite substantial. So I would, as part of that process and agreeing a construction logistics plan and a considerate contractor approach, you would seriously expect and require the developer to be in touch with their neighbours and be considerate and deal with issues that no doubt arise with such a scheme.
Okay, thank you. If there are no further questions, we have a number of people wishing to address us on the application. So objectors, we have Mr Goddard and Mr King. If they could make their way down, please. The agents and the applicants, we have Mr Quelch, Mr Carnes and Mr Fowler, so they can make their way down as well. We have local ward councillor, Councillor Cummings, and we also have Councillor Steve O'Connell speaking as the GLA member. If taking those in that order, so if Mr Goddard and Mr King could make their way down, please. So, gentlemen, have you decided, you've got 5 minutes in total, have you decided how you're going to split your time? Sorry? 50-50. Do you want us to tell you when you've got halfway through? Yeah, okay. Thank you. So,
Is
that's it.
That working?
Great.
Wonderful. Okay. I'll start. I'm speaking on behalf of the Fitzroy Wakefield Action Group and the 299 local objectors to this scheme. We do welcome an improved Queen's Hotel, but we overwhelmingly object to these plans. I'm going to summarise our objections in 3 ways. The scheme is basically too big, it's too close, and it's just not appropriate for the area. At 530 rooms, this would be one of the largest hotels in London. A hotel of this size would normally be serving an airport, an entertainment venue, or a major transport hub. Crystal Palace has none of these. In fact, with a PTAL rating for the site of only 2/3, it most certainly is definitely not a major transport hub. During consultation, residents actually requested fewer rooms, but from the outset it was made very clear that the size of the hotel was not a point that could be negotiated on. The increased numbers of guests, additional services, vehicles and coaches will increase traffic and add to the severe congestion and pollution issues that already exist in the area. I think we've already discussed the coaches, but I would stress that this is a site that's going to rely on road access, a PTAL rating of 2/3, and the sensitivities that we previously had in this area. It already sounds like we're budgeting for parking infringements. It's just a bone of contention for residents. And forgive us for sort of having not too much faith in the ability of the hotel to manage the behaviours of the guest, because it's proved a problem in the past. I've been asked to speak because my home is one of the closest to the new rear spine building that will dominate the streets. I actually shared an image earlier that looks quite different without the leaves on the trees. A 5-storey block butts up against home. I have to challenge the separation distance because it looks like 2 house widths on the plans, which would be about 10 metres. The fact that so many windows are being obscured to maintain some level of privacy is surely evidence of overdevelopment. The scheme is actually 3 times the accepted density level for a residential scheme. And finally, the impact on local residents' well-being should not be underestimated. Finally, reasons for such a huge increase in rooms just don't seem to stack up. There's been suggestions that guests might visit the yet-to-be-built Westfield. Seems laughable when you could opt to stay in central Croydon. If guests were to drive, where's the improved road infrastructure to cope with match days at Selhurst Park? Or will they take the 45-minute bus journey instead? That it forms part of the Gatwick Diamond? It doesn't. Crystal Palace has inferior links compared to Croydon and has no relationship with Gatwick. Councillors, does it not ring alarm bells that this has 39 outstanding planning conditions? I'll sum it really quickly.
Mr. King, you are eating into Mr. Goddard's time.
Okay, apologies. Go on, carry on.
The Queen's Hotel is situated in an area rich in historic buildings. The officer's report lists 4 Grade 2 listed buildings and no less than 11 locally listed buildings in the vicinity. The Church Road Conservation Area Appraisal and Management Plan states that, quote, all new development should respect the established layout, siting, height, scale and massing of buildings, and lists a specific threat to the character and appearance of the conservation area, quote, new development that disregards the layout, scale and character of surrounding buildings, end of quote, and, quote, oversized or poorly designed extensions. The layout, siting, height, scale and massing of the proposed new buildings do not respect those of surrounding buildings, and the huge rear extension is both oversized and poorly designed. The only contribution to the character and appearance of the conservation area is the reduction in height of the ugly modern extension by 1 storey, which is not enough, and the recladding, which does little to compensate for the damaging effect on the conservation area of the huge new extension proposed. The officer's report focuses heavily on the relationship of the new extensions to the existing building rather than their relationship to the conservation area as a whole, which is what it ought to be doing. Secondly, the appearance of the hotel is already poor due to its excessive size and the juxtaposition of different dates and styles. The huge further extension of the Church Road facade to the south in yet another style just makes it worse, not better. How can bronze metal cladding, including window frames, matching render and bronze aluminium coping to the roof, none of which are found in any Victorian building, be, quote, complementary and sympathetic to the Queen's Hotel, as the officer's report claims? Thirdly, the London plan says, beyond the central activities zone, visitor accommodation should be focused in town centres and opportunity and intensification areas where there is good public transport access. The Croydon plan says that the metropolitan centre should be the principal location for hotels. Granted that there is a need for more hotel accommodation in Greater London, this should take place in suitable locations in or near central Croydon, not by doubling in size an existing very large hotel. It's already the size of 2 or 3 travel lodges. It'll be the size of between 5 and 6 travel lodges by the time they finish.
Mr. Goddard, I'm afraid the time is up. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, gentlemen, if you wouldn't mind moving aside, and we'll now bring the applicant's agents down, Mr. Quelch, Ms. Carnes, and Mr. Fowler. Okay, so I can see you've reduced your number down to 2 already, which helps with the seating. Have you decided how you're going to split your 5 minutes between you? And do you wish us to time keep for you?
I'll be doing the speaking, and if there's any questions afterwards, sorry, I'm Richard Quelch, planning consultant. We'll be answering them jointly. So Katie from Marcel Architecture will be able to help with the design questions. So
okay, just to be clear, we can't bring you back and ask you questions, unfortunately, on this meeting. Okay. I know we did the pre-app, but that's a different arrangement. Okay, so when you're ready, please.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak in support of the scheme. Our client owns a number of hotels across London and is currently undergoing a refurbishment and redevelopment programme to upgrade these hotels and deliver them as nationally recognised brands. Members will recall that our client obtained a resolution to grant planning permission for the redevelopment of the existing hotel on London Road opposite Croydon Mosque and University Hotel. That hotel also forms part of our client's extensive programme of redevelopment and rebranding. The objective of this application is to upgrade the existing Queen's Hotel, which has, over the years, been the subject of piecemeal development and requires repair work and upgrading and improvement of accommodation. There is already a branding agreement in place for a new hotel with Best Western. In terms of the context, many parts of the original building, original character of the building, have been lost over a period of time with piecemeal extensions and the construction of a large, attractive 1970s block fronting Church Road, which you've already discussed. From discussions with Historic England, the GLA and officers, the key heritage feature which remains intact is the original central building on Church Road. The overarching design approach, the proposal has been firstly to retain and make good this existing centrepiece building, secondly to retain the existing 1970s building on Church Road but reclad it, thirdly, at the opposite end of the Church Road frontage, provide a new building to replace an original structure which was burnt down during a historic fire. Fourthly, the removal of the rear buildings and replacement with a new spine building. And lastly, a new landscaping scheme to improve the appearance of Church Road. Since April 2016, we've undertaken positive pre-application discussions with the Council and GLA until submission of a planning application in April of this year. In addition, we presented to Planning Committee in July, and you recall that members' key comments at this stage of the design process included that the scheme should relate well to the heritage of the site. And members were also supportive of the cladding of the 1970s block and removal of the top floor extension on Church Road, as well as having comments around car, coach and landscaping. The applicant has also engaged in extensive dialogue with local residents to seek to ensure these views are heard and responded to wherever possible. This included a formal public consultation exercise in October of last year, and the applicant has also met with Fitzroy Wakefield Action Group, the Regency Garden Group and the Norwood Society, as well as a number of meetings with different groups of individual residents. After the submission of the planning application, again as officers explained, residents made further comments via the Council's formal consultation process. Following a meeting with residents, further amendments to the scheme were undertaken which focused on ensuring the amenity of the Wakefield Gardens and Fitzroy Gardens properties were protected. In the last few days, the applicant has also agreed to accept a number of the planning conditions put forward by the Fitzroy Wakefield Action Group. As a result of these extensive pre-applications discussions, the scheme now benefits from a recommendation for approval by officers, support from the GLA and no objection from Historic England. Our client is committed to working closely with the community and has already set up a community forum to which all local residents are invited, which is due to meet in December. And the intention of that forum is to discuss the ongoing management of the hotel outside of the planning application. We'll also set up a dedicated construction liaison group during the period of the works. So there are a number of benefits that we believe the hotel scheme will bring, which I'll list. The firstly is the creation of a branded hotel with better and improved hotel accommodation, swimming pool and gym facilities and a new dining area. Secondly, making good the original centrepiece of the building and its framing with a scheme of a high-quality design, including the cladding of the 1970s block. Thirdly, a new landscaping scheme. Fourthly, circa 100 new jobs associated with the hotel, as well as the construction jobs. Also, potentially locally sourced jobs associated with the hotel and the construction process. Enhanced spending capacity from new customers of the hotel for local businesses. Increased parking provision to help alleviate on-street parking pressures. Improved coach parking arrangements, which will give the council control over how coaches are parked and parked off-site. A green and sustainable scheme, which will reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And payments towards infrastructure of around £280,000 towards mayoral SIL and £1.7 million towards local SIL. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. Now we have local councillor, Councillor Cummings. Councillor Cummings, you've got up to 5 minutes to tell us about your concerns.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for allowing me to speak. For many people in the room, I've only been elected early September, so this is very new for me. So if I use any terms that aren't correct, please forgive me. I'm asking for your indulgence now. During my campaign, one of the most talked about issue on the doorstep was the Queen's Hotel. Now, this wasn't just the people in the locale. These were many people, many of the residents across the whole of the ward, which is over 11,000, and some of the adjoining wards. Now, Crystal Palace is unique. It borders on 5 different boroughs, and there has been some objections by at least one MP and some councillors in some of those other boroughs. Now, some of the residents in some of the resident associations are here today. They are here. There's over 300, just under 300 in the Fitzroy, Wakefield and Action Group, and we've heard from some of their representatives. Now, there's a lot of information that I won't go over that some of them have spoken about, but just to highlight some of the things that I've heard this evening. We're talking about the fact that there was a community engagement, and that's been spoken about on 2 or 3 occasions. It's all well and good having community engagement, but what was that engagement? And most of that engagement was saying, yes, it's great that you would actually improve the building, but we don't want this overdevelopment. And I think that was unanimous. And I think given the fact that they weren't allowed, or they thought they weren't allowed to actually object to the development, and they made some recommendations, then perhaps that's all they felt they could do. But overwhelmingly, the residents in the area did not want this large development. Now, you talk about parking, you talk about the coaches, and what's actually proposed sounds very well and good, but there are actual parking issues and traffic issues already existing with the size of the hotel as it exists today. Now, it's all, there's lots of information that was given. We're talking about the parking in the hotel. Well, it would have been nice had somebody informed us how much that would have been, because there's a lot of hotels that people will park on the streets to avoid paying in the car park. So that's interesting to find that that possibly could be an issue day one for the residents in terms of parking. And I know TfL would have actually done its consultations. You talk about all these things that have been done. But the residents of South Norwood experience this on a daily basis. And I just wonder how much notice has been taken to some of their objections and some of the issues that they've actually had to deal with over a number of years. We're talking about, I think on the previous application, I know I'm not supposed to comment on that, but Councillor Kabir did mention about people should be able to enjoy their environment. Now, there is a lot of issues. I think the residents have already communicated on how this overdevelopment will affect their enjoyment of their community. When I saw the plans, it's all well and good. It looks like a great development. You talk about keeping the mews. Well, if there was no development, the mews would already still be there. You talk about putting more greenery around. Well, their existing greenery is absolutely fine. This isn't a development that I would actually expect to see somewhere in Purley, near the Hilton, or near Gatwick. It's a huge development in a very residential area where there's dense housing already in existence. I can't understand why you're increasing it. We're going to have over 100 rooms that are underground, 70 odd that are going to be without windows, I understand. And there is, I don't know, it's been asked about the access for disability, for disabled access. I'm not sure how well that will work, but I'm really concerned about the quality of the design for the area. You talked about upgrading. That would be fine, I suspect, but not this huge overdevelopment in such a small area. You talked about having extended dialogue, and you talked about the community forum in December. Well, that's after the planning. And I don't think for us to talk to the community for their objections after the horse has bolted is actually a good way of...
Councillor, I'm afraid your time is up.
That's fine.
Thank you. And next, Councillor O'Connell, who's the GLA member. You have up to 5 minutes to tell us about your concerns.
Thank you, Chair, very much. I speak today as GLA member representing the area and supporting the something like 300 objectors, which has been commented is cross-border and indeed cross-party. And I think that should send a message, and the objections are supported by Steve Reid, the MP. I think he wrote to you all earlier in the week. I kind of, and Councillor Cummings asked for forbearance if she used comments and phrases that weren't. I will ask for no forbearance around that, because I think this is a preposterous application, and I admire the valiant attempts by the planning officer and the transport officer to defend the indefensible. The recommendation to me, and I'll get into why I'm giving you this recommendation, is for reasons of massing, density, out of character, negative impact on the neighbourhood, and contrary to policy that we heard earlier, are perfectly strong and valid good reasons to refuse this application. Now, we talked about parking. The coach parking, now that's an interesting one. We've got a preposterous, I'll use that word again, coach parking plans. We're going to park them somewhere down at Palace FC and somewhere in Streatham, and that's clearly not going to work, and I would suggest unenforceable. While I'm talking about the Mayor, because I'm commenting on the GLA's comments on it, if you agree this, the Mayor has recommended that there's too much parking in this application, and he wants less parking. But there's been reference to the trip parking plan. The Mayor has said it's faulty, it's defective, he doesn't like it, and he wants it reviewed. And that is a matter of course, because I read it today, and I've had the Stage 1 letter sent to me today. Already, historically, there's issues around on-road parking in that area. And you're going to add, and how many is it now? We're going to have 530 rooms in totality, and we're going to have an extra 21,000 square metre space in that area. Now, does that make some sense around that? Now, it's already been commented by objectors and the councillor. This is a massive semi-industrial size hotel that you would see next to Gatwick Airport, perhaps in metropolitan Croydon Centre, or in London Town Centre, not on the edge of, and actually the GLA comments on the edge of a district centre. That's not the place to put it. We've already commented, not even a good PTAL rating. Not even a good PTAL rating. Now, the applicant says there's some good things for the community. Well, the community, for a start, aren't allowed to use the facilities. That's a good start. So there's that. 100 jobs, which are to be welcomed, and shopping. And, of course, on the ground floor, there's a nice straight corridor. Now, I'm sure that's a very good reason. And we're going to have an extra 100 people working. Now, those 100 people are going to be operating a 24-hour service, quite rightly. Many of them are. Are they going to be using public transport throughout the night? Probably not. The nearest station is Gypsy Hill, which is nowhere near. So we have a massive issue around parking and around the parking plan. Design. Well, again, I'm not a designer. What do I know? But that side elevation, when we saw that side elevation, you're trying to tell me that that is a good design and a good aspect. I thought that was horrendous. And it's interesting that people are supportive of that. This plan apparently has been in front of your good committee in the past, I understand, and you've had a look at it. So, to me, if this is the final acceptable modified scheme, heaven knows what the initial scheme looked like, if this is the best you can come up with. And remember, the committee is not operating in a vacuum. There's a massive opposition in the community on this. You must consider the community in this. And I'm afraid, by forming a post-planning decision forum, is not consulting the community. So, colleagues, also air pollution. So you're talking about cars. The Mayor's pointed out in his report about increased air pollution. People are not all going to drive, clearly, but many will have to drive to the area. And to say that you're increasing the car parking, but then you're increasing the numbers to 500 rooms, is clutching, frankly, at straws. So we have a real issue with this. It's patently obvious to me, to the councillor, to the MP, and the MP across the border, and many, many residents, that this is completely unacceptable. So I would ask you and urge you to think again on this application and refuse it for the reasons I stated at the beginning. Thank you, committee.
Thank you. Okay. Do officers have anything further to add? Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 5 points I want to take members through, following on from comments from speakers. Clearly, this application has generated a lot of interest. It's generated interest cross-border, and it's generated an awful lot of comments. I just want to remind members, and we've had discussions on this in the past, that the primary consideration of any planning application, whether it's a Queen's Hotel or any other scheme, is compliance and development that's in accordance with our policies and proposals within the development plan. You know, the number of objections isn't a consideration. What is the merits of those comments that are made and whether they are well-founded in terms of policies and proposals within the development plan. So, if I may, Chair, I think it's important that members steer themselves away from the level of comment, but focus on the material considerations, which is the duty of this committee to focus on. So, if I can say that first of all. The second point I want to make is around the process of this planning application. I think the applicant, and it's interesting what the applicant had to say around, say, the rebranding of this particular hotel. And for me, I think the problem with the hotel over the years is it has had, various extensions and various elements coming before this committee. But I'm quite heartened by the fact that there is a much more comprehensive approach to the extension and upgrading of this hotel. And it's, for me, it shows that the nature of the hotel is going to change. And with that, I think, is going to be to the benefit of the immediate area, but it's also to the benefit of the local economy in terms of enhancing Crystal Palace and Upper Norwood in terms of additional spend. But it has been a process that's involved pre-application engagement with this committee. And you look at the comments that this committee made at pre-application and how the applicant has approached that through responding, I think, positively to a number of the points that members made at that stage. And I think that's still continuing in many ways. And I don't think we should forget that, and I think it's important that the applicant is saying that they're content to and wanting to continue to engage with residents, assuming this application is approved by this committee this evening, because in many cases, it's important that developers continue to engage post-planning permission. And I was heartened by that comment myself, that they are still committed, and it comes back to considerate contractor and everything else, that developers continue to engage with their local community, because this is an important part and an important constituent in this part of Crystal Palace. In terms of the heritage assets and the design, I know there's been a lot of talk around the design and how this has come forward. I think there are a number of unfortunate extensions that have been done to this building in the past, and I think the original extension, particularly the spine building, is very much down at heel. And we believe, notwithstanding comments you've heard this evening, that the quality of the extensions and how they relate to the existing fabric of the building is a positive one. I appreciate that it is, an extension that is going to, have an effect or an impact, but we feel that that impact is a positive one, and it works well in terms of its neighbour relationships, but also how it appears in terms of its architectural quality. It is a muted palette, but it works and contrasts very well with the historic fabric, and it works well in our view, Chair. I want to touch briefly on the Section 106 agreement. There's been a lot of discussion around the Section 106 agreement. There are a number of requirements of the Section 106 agreement, and I think the coach parking management plan, which we've heard all about, that's the way in which, if you had you have to accept that coaches need to park off-site. Otherwise, hotels will not function. And there is a very tried and tested approach around London that there are areas where coaches can go to sleep during the and then come and pick their customers up and take them where they're going to. And I think it's important that there is no control, or very little control at the moment, of how this hotel operates. And this application and the way that we've dealt with it through condition, there are a lot of conditions. Conditions are there to control development, and that's why we have a lot of conditions with this type of thing, to make sure that the planning process is controlling how this scheme is brought forward. Coach and car parking is critical to see and understand how payments and how work to actually control parking. And I think the other thing that for me has been really important, and we've worked very hard as officers to make sure, is the phasing plan. And I think Mr White took you through the phasing plan. And this committee at pre-application talked about the benefits of this scheme, or the potential benefits of this scheme in enhancing certain aspects of this building. The phasing plan is very much linked to the Section 106 agreement to make sure that we can control and deliver the important things that this scheme seeks to deliver. So I can't enough stress the importance of the Section 106 agreement, which are, all those matters are enforceable, and it's very much the way in which we move forward. Finally, I just wanted to say something about the GLA. This has the support of the London Mayor at stage 1. In fact, it's had a very glowing response in terms of the importance of this particular site as a hotel. The London Mayor at stage 1 wholeheartedly supported the principle of an enlarged hotel and how that can benefit this particular area and also enhance job opportunities and the economy of this part of Crystal Palace. So overall, Chair, yes, I commend the scheme to you and thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. I open this to the committee. Councillor Wright, then Councillor Tracus-Lawler.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the committee knows how much I value the site visits, and I've said it many, many times. This was an extremely important site visit, although it was about a year, probably more than a year ago. It gave us a very good insight onto how the hotel worked and how it hoped would work with the extensions that it could put in. And one of the most interesting things which I remember well was talking to the management of the hotel and how he saw the hotel would function and how it functions now. And he was saying that he was marketing particularly young students from abroad on coaches. And I said to him, well, how many coaches? And he said, well, in the height of the season, it could have up to 10 or 11. Because that's our market, and that's what we're going for. And that was particularly relevant when we saw the subterranean rooms and how small they were. And again, we have said, how long do people stay in these small subterranean rooms? And he said, well, it's students, they'll stay about 3 days, probably most. So that's an answer to Councillor Chatterjee was asking about to stay. And that won't be, of course, the complete number of 500 and whatever people, but it is what his market was and what he was going for, and it's very interesting to hear that. So that's one of the values of that. But also, of course, in the site visit, we'll be able to go around the back and see what a mess it is at the moment, and how, when the extensions were do it would be improved. And that is a plus in my way, that I, in fact, taken into account the dreadful mess at the back. It will be overbearing. It will be detrimental to Fitzroy Gardens, and no doubt about it, because it will be a lot taller and more dominant over Fitzroy Gardens, and I don't think that is a good thing, and that should, I think, is an error in the development. I think the thing to remember mostly, I think, really, is the fact that this is a development which is in a conservation area. And it's a very valued conservation area, and several listed buildings in the area need to be addressed, and this in particular. I think the committee has really got to look at the fact, is this development in this Queen's Hotel going to enhance and improve that conservation area in any way? And I don't honestly see that it possibly can. You have a mass of a large building, which is going to be an even larger mass in the future. And the two extensions on the left and right. The right one, yes, it will look a little bit better because the one at the moment is so horrible, and the cladding will be a little bit better. The one on the left, it's just not needed. It's not needed at all, because all it will do is make the mass even more and just not go in any way to enhance that conservation area. So that building on the left should not even be considered, because it just adds to the very big problem. It adds to the problem of dominance, adds to the problem of mass, it adds to the problem of extra visitors and extra rumours. The other thing to consider, of course, is sitting on Church Road, which is already a very busy road. And although a lot of people come into the hotel will not come by car, obviously, there will be many who will come. Any extra traffic movements onto Church Road will be horrendous. I mean, sometimes, as you know, Church Road just comes to a complete standstill. And if you can make an entrance in and out of the Queen's Hotel with cars, with coaches, etc., it will be horrendous. And I just fear for the residents around about. Why should they have to endure what the road's still bad enough now. Why should they have to endure all this extra when it's in our remit to stop it? And I think now's the time that we can stop it right away. The public transport, PTL 2 or 3, I can't really see how it can possibly be 3. Yes, there are buses, but Gypsy Hill, as Councillor O'Connell said, is the nearest proper railway station, and that is some distance away, and it's not good. For instance, anyway, if they're going to be supposed to be walking or coming by coach, that's the way they're going to have to go, because most of these are visitors, and they're going to be looking for going into the centre of town, so they're going to have to get to Gypsy Hill. It's not good. We are increasing to 530 rooms, 530 residents at the height of the season, all going down towards Gypsy Hill, or trying to get onto buses, or heaven forbid, using their cars and driving into the centre of London. It's just not... there's so many things, Mr Chairman, that is really bad about this development. It's the fact that we've got so far appalls me, really. To think that we've had a chance, 2 or 3 years, a chance to really make a proper development, a development that is in keeping with the conservation area, is in keeping with the local area and the local residents, and all we've done is make the life of local residents even worse, and we've made the dominance even worse, and made the conservation area even worse. We've done nothing good at all, apart from supply a few jobs, 100 jobs, well, it's a few, it's 100 jobs, and we've supplied some landscaping. Put that against the misery of the local residents and the detrimental design that we've got on that property. There's nothing good, really, about it at all, Mr Chairman. And I propose refusal based on overdevelopment, on the detrimental effect of the conservation area, and on the community. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Trekkers-Lawler.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's not very often I can say that I agree with Councillor Wright and Councillor O'Connell, but this is one occasion when I agree with what they've said in its entirety. I'm really actually disappointed at the presentation and at the massing of the hotel. You could say that it's the wrong development in the wrong area, especially in a residential area. And Mr Smith, your point about material considerations, you're absolutely right, of course, but in my view, that's one of the big flaws in the planning system. While I understand the need for businesses to grow and to develop, which I welcome and encourage, there has to be a better way of doing it that respects the cultural integrity and the wishes of local residents. And from a local council's perspective, it's the local residents' opinions and feelings that are one of the important issues. Material considerations, of course, and I'll come on to that. My constituents are already feeling quite aggrieved, very aggrieved actually, over the very real problems of parking in the local area, which I would like to add isn't just Fitzroy and Wakefield. You go down to Stambourne, down to Sylvan Hill, all along Church Road. It's a real problem, and we really cannot ignore that, because if we do ignore that, the problems for residents will just become vastly exacerbated. For a 530-room hotel in a predominantly residential area, as we've heard, you would expect parking provision for around 11 coaches, not 3, and I think there's already been a mention of how would the parking arrangements fit. For example, if a coach were to go down to Selhurst Park on a match day, I could see that as a recipe for chaos, personally. We all received, as members of this committee, objections from local residents, and these are reasonable people with reasonable objections, and their way of life has already been compromised through previous applications. And if this application is accepted, I fear that situation will deteriorate even further. If I can talk about the objections, we have received an unprecedented number of objections from local representatives, including Helen Hayes, who's one of the local MPs, Steve Reed, Fiona Twycross from the GLA, and of course Steve, and Councillors John Wentworth and Pat Ryan, as well as my ward colleague, Councillor Cummings. in addition to 249 objections. We've seen a long litany of objections in the report, and in my view, along with what Councillor Wright has proposed, that is enough to refuse the application. And I would strongly urge fellow committee members to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if I should say this myself or pass it over to one of the officers, but Councillor, I need to warn you that I think the comments that you've made in terms of how you are judging this decision are entirely against the whole principle of how we are required to make decisions. Whether we like the planning system as it is or not, we have to follow the guidance. And
Chair, absolutely, I totally agree with you, and that's not the basis for my decision. Well, incidentally,
Councillor,
that's been set out already.
Councillor, that's what you said, unfortunately. And I mean, just to quote the government guidance, how must elected councillors and other members of the local authority consider planning applications? And it does say, and I won't go through the whole thing, local opposition or support for a proposal is not in itself a ground for refusing or granting planning permission, unless it is founded upon material planning reasons. It has to be, you know, your decision needs to be based on material planning considerations, not, as you've said on a number of occasions, the feelings and views of local residents.
Chair, I completely understand that.
Councillor, please do not interrupt, because this is an important point. And I think you do probably need to qualify what you've just said to make it clear that you are deciding on the base on legally sound grounds.
Absolutely.
Sean,
the parking considerations themselves, Chair.
Councillor,
if I can just
Councillor,
say,
please stop interrupting. Yeah, please. Can I ask our legal advisor, please, to advise this a little bit further? Thank you.
Chair, I don't really have much to add because you have summarised it extremely well, and Pete Smith referred to this earlier as well. But the number of planning objections is certainly not irrelevant material planning consideration, and I think some frustration around that has been noted. But in terms of making your actual decision, it needs to be clear that it's on material planning grounds, and if you're supporting the move that was already made, it would be about making that clear and that you're not taking into account the number of planning objections.
I've looked at the number of planning objections. I've noted that. I thought I'd been very clear the reasons why I supported refusal. There's very little further I can add to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Chatterjee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. If I understand it correctly, Councillor Praxall hasn't actually seconded the... You did. You have.
Sorry, Chair, I thought at the start I did. Right.
Oh, sorry. Thank you very much. That's very welcome because, I do think that this application, as proposed, does have too much... is an overdevelopment. There is too much massing. It's out of character with the area. We've heard various comments on this right throughout the evening. And so I'd like to also agree with the two councillors who've spoken already. Thank you.
Councillor Prince.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to move that we approve this application. I haven't produced a speech or rehearsed anything, as several speakers have tonight, but I do remember the pre-application demonstration and so forth that we had. And I remember that at that time, one of the things that impressed me the most was that as part of this application, the symmetry of the Church Road frontage that was destroyed when the left-hand block would be reinstated. That symmetry would be reinstated. I don't think that makes the massing too much. I don't like the present look of the 70s block, which presumably, if we turn down this evening's application, all the residents will have to live with that block for a lot longer. It seems to me that the redesign of it, the cladding, gives it a more, albeit modern, residential feel. You know, the existing block feels more like an office block to me, and that therefore that the cladding is an improvement on the present situation, and that reflecting that in the other bookend is a good thing in that it improves the symmetry of the building. On questions like possible traffic problems and so forth, obviously I understand the local residents' objections and fears for that, but we've heard from people who've studied the numbers and so forth, and I think that while I use Church Road a lot, already myself, it is a very busy road, but that if the numbers of the car parking spaces and so forth, and the calculations that have been done on the traffic show that it's going to be, okay, not too detrimental, then I think we should accept that. And on the, I think, I won't go through the whole list, but on the conservation area point, I think that at the moment the building detracts from the conservation area, and that if these proposals are completed, that they will in fact enhance it. So I would vote in favour of it for those and other reasons.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. Bearing in mind we have a motion that's been seconded to refuse, I would be grateful if Councillor White could repeat, just for the record, what his suggested reasons for refusal might be.
Yes, certainly.
So I can...
An overdevelopment and massing detrimental to the conservation area and parking.
Parking? In
Yes,
terms of
traffic
inadequate
movements
parking,
and parking, yeah.
And problems of on-street parking, or?
Yeah, on-street parking, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Wimborne.
Thank you, Chairman. I cannot support this application. It is a complete overdevelopment. It is out of character in a conservation area. It will cause a lot of parking problems for the local roads. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Councillor Kabir.
Thank you, Chair. I remember the pre-application time, and we made lots of recommendations, and I think those were taken into account. Then there were a lot of consultation with local groups through their solicitors. Number of recommendations has been taken on as well. Considering all this, as a committee here, what I would like to see is, in one hand, yes, there are public views and residents' views. That's what we get in all applications. And if we are judging on the basis of those objections, there will be no new houses or no new development, simple as that, because we are simply listening to the objectives and objections. My point is, Croydon is a growing town. Croydon needs hotel. We know that. We have lots of hotel coming up in central Croydon. But this is an existing hotel which has been there for nearly 100 years, or more than 100 years. And they are asking for 196 rooms. Now, what they have mitigated to do that? They have gone to underground, they have gone to basement, and also they have reduced a floor on the top, and they are bringing the symmetry of the present look to a shape that it will be much better visually than it is now. They are tidying up the back. I've seen that in the presentation. There are a lot of pipes and the extension wire almost everywhere. So they are tidying it up. So I do understand there are objections, but I feel that it's a good news for looking at it as a good site, basically, a clean site for that area. So, and I'm convinced about the car parking. Number has gone up. considering the ratio from the last time, only 38 car park for almost 338 rooms. Now it's going to 170, so that's good. And I do use this road at the moment, and I know there's occasionally you get traffic, but that's where you get everywhere in Croydon. It took me half an hour to travel 2 miles in going from West Croydon towards West Croydon to South Croydon. So it doesn't. This is the reality of life. Traffic will be there, but there is a traffic management, and it can be reviewed, it can be monitored. So I'm convinced that I'm going to support this, knowing that it is bringing 100 new jobs, knowing that it's a plan that will bring new visitors in town, new economy. So that's how town grows. Second, the approval.
So, can I just check? Thank you, Councillor Prince. Did you move approval? You did, right? Thank you. And so second approval. Okay, I'll bring myself in next. Can't see anybody else indicating. I think this is a challenging application. There's no two ways about it. It is an already large hotel in an area that is now predominantly residential. Actually, that hotel existed before most of that residential, virtually all of that residential actually existed, actually. So actually the use of as a large hotel on this site is very established. And it is outside of the district centre, but it is very close to the district centre and serves that district centre, I'm sure, well now. Any future expansion, extension, I think, would be economically very of great benefit to particularly the Crystal Palace centre. And also, of course, it's providing the 100 jobs within the actual scheme itself. The scale of the building is, the pieces of it are actually large, and I think on the front, I think the scale is fine. I mean, actually, the reduction in height of the existing and much quite rightly maligned 1970s extension being reduced, the whole appearance of that building being made more, still a modern interpretation, but a much more appropriate and in keeping and neutral addition to extension to the original buildings as extended. Well, that would help considerably. I think the south wing is a sort of a modest reflection of that. I don't think there's a particular problem with that. I think the idea of having architecture that's actually quite simple and modest, so that the more jolly architecture of the original locally listed building is still the landmark, I think is the right approach. In terms of scale on Church Road, this is a large building. It was always intended to be a large building. There's no two ways about it. When they first built it, it was a large building, and it's still, a large-scale building to this day. It was built as part of the history and development of the local area, very much. The coming of the Crystal Palace, this was one of the number of hotels that actually followed on from that. I think the scale to the rear is the more challenging aspect of the project, but actually, if you look at the larger parts of that, they are of a similar scale to the rear of the existing parts of the building. Now, I think also, though, I think the important thing is what impact would those larger scale elements, larger scale extension to the rear, actually have on the local residential area. It isn't overlooking gardens. It isn't overshadowing gardens. It is separated by that large and rather nice area of private garden, the big open garden space. So it's separated. If it was right up against the back gardens of houses, that would be a very, very different matter. Windows are being partially obscured. Some of the windows that are closest to the homes have got angled bays, so there won't be any direct overlooking. So the impact on the neighbouring properties will be minimal. If we look at the parking situation, which I think is one of the things that seems to be of a particular concern for local residents, and is understandable, there is a lot of parking in the immediate area. There's a lot of parking in the whole area, frankly. If you go miles in any direction, there's lots and lots of on-street parking. That's what's living in London is what is like. It happens everywhere. But actually, if you go down to Fitzroy Gardens, there's very little on-street parking. All of the houses have their own garage and their own forecourts. There's a double yellow line down one part of the road that stops parking. And yes, there are some parking bays at the top of the road, but there aren't very many of those. 10, maybe? 12? Which are shared. So it's hard to see how, in terms of the impact on Fitzroy Gardens and the neighbouring street, that the impact will be worsened by this development. The level of car parking, though, has, and to some aggravation of TfL, has been increased quite significantly to actually provide a good level of parking. The coach parking arrangements, as we have heard very, very clearly, this is a very common arrangement for providing for coach parking. When was the last time any of us went and stayed at a hotel, and someone will probably say they did, where there was 11 or 12 coach parking spaces in the forecourt? It doesn't happen. You have to have these sensible arrangements. And I think here that they've clearly thought about it. It's, the parking provision is provided. A lot of people will be arriving to the hotel by those coaches. Some people will be arriving by public transport. But if they jump off a train and it's a bit of a walk to the hotel, they'll do as probably most of us do if we're going to stay in a new city or a new town. We'll actually get a taxi, so they'll get a taxi there. So I think the parking and access provisions have been properly considered. I think the design is good, it is appropriate and is suitable, but what it does more importantly than anything else is celebrate the original locally listed buildings. As Councillor Wright said himself, round the back is an absolute mess at the moment. It's terrible. Now, we can hope that might get sorted out if the hotel doesn't expand, but it won't, frankly. The hotel needs to be able to expand to be able to afford the extensive positive re-provisions that are actually being supported and being brought forward as a result of this scheme. And I'm pleased to see that we've got a phasing plan that ensures that those good things actually do come. They don't just build the extra extensions and then walk away and don't overclad the 1970s block, for example. There's been a lot of consultation on this, and I'm pleased to see that the Muse building is actually being retained. I think that's very positive as part of the older, not as old as the front bit, but some of the older parts to the rear. It is a shame that more bits of the older piece, the piece with the bay window, for example, right at the back, can't be retained. But I think that's nice, but it's not so nice as to be a showstopper for the development. So I think, all in all, personally, I think the scheme has done enough. It is big, it is challenging, but it is ambitious, it is positive for the town. I don't see that the case has been made that there is such a negative impact on the local residents that this should be unreasonable. I fully understand that there have been problems with this hotel in the past. And there have been issues about parties and the government bringing in very large numbers of refugees with no support, those kind of things happening. But this hotel is moving forward. It's trying to actually develop in a way that sounds a lot more positive. It is setting up a local forum for meeting with the residents. And I think that should be taken as a positive way of actually managing things going forward. So, we have a big hotel already. It's looking to get bigger. We have a heritage asset that will be improved as a result of this. We have an opportunity here to help improve the economy of the local area, and it is an economy that needs support. So I will be supporting this application. I understand the challenges around it, but I think it's one that, on balance, is the right solution. Thank you. Can I see anybody else wishing to speak? Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. Clearly, we all want good jobs and we all want a good architecture. For me, though, I have heard too many concerns and still have them around parking and size of the development. So, on balance, I will be supporting refusal, and I hope something more thoughtful and caring will come forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? No? In that case, we have two motions completed for consideration. The first of those to be completed was for refusal, moved by Councillor Wright and seconded by Councillor Trackus-Lawler. And Mr Smith, are you happy that you've got the reasons for refusal clearly identified?
I'll just repeat them again. On grounds of overdevelopment and massing, which is detrimental to the character and appearance of the conservation area, and issues of car parking, presumably insufficient parking, and the impact of the scale of development on potential additional on-street car parking pressure.
Councillor Wright, does that you're happy with that? Okay. So that's the first motion that we will take. The second motion was for approval, moved by Councillor Prince and seconded by Councillor Kabir. Can I see those in favour of refusal?
That's 6, Chair.
And those against?
4, Chair.
So that is refused, and the second motion for approval falls. Okay, thank you very much. That's been a rather long session, so I think we will take a 5-minute comfort break, and then we'll reconvene at 10 past for the last item for the evening. Okay? Thank you. Which is item 6.2, Rees House on Moorland Lodge and number 6 Moorland Road. The presenting officer is Matt Carney. Matt, when you're ready, please.
Thanks, Chair. This application, item 6.2, is the demolition of the existing buildings and erection of a new Part 4, Part 5-storey school at Rees House, Moorland Lodge and 6 Moorland Road, Croydon. The site, which is highlighted in red, currently comprises of 3 existing buildings which are all in a poor state of repair and have been subject to antisocial behaviour in recent years. The property here was formerly a medical centre. The other 2 buildings have previously been in use as offices. The area is predominantly residential in character, with smaller properties to the north and west, with larger flatted blocks to the south and south and west, the smaller properties to the north and the east. The area is generally flat in topography, and it's important to note the site is allocated for a secondary school in Croydon's emerging local plan.
Matt, sorry, could I just interrupt you for one moment? I thought everybody was back in the room, and Councillor Kabir isn't back in the room. Could we just hold on for a moment?
No problem.
Could somebody please just go out and check? Apologies.
Yeah, that's okay. I'll just start this slide again. Yeah. Is that something last?
Okay, sorry, Matt, if you could start again. Thank you. We haven't got very far in.
Okay, so this is item 6.2, which is the demolition of the existing buildings and erection of a new Part 4, Part 5-storey school at Rees House, Moorland Lodge and 6 Moorland Road, Croydon. Turning to the site location plan, the site, which is highlighted in red, currently comprises of 3 existing buildings, which are all in a poor state of repair and have been subject to antisocial behaviour in recent years. The building here on the east of the site was formerly in use as a medical centre, where the other 2 buildings have been in office use. The area is predominantly residential in character, with smaller residential properties to the north and east, and larger flatted blocks to the south and west. The area is generally flat in topography,
And as I just about to mention, the site is allocated for a secondary school in the Council's emerging local plan detailed policies and also in the Croydon infrastructure delivery plan. Using the aerial image to demonstrate the local highway context, Moreland Road, which runs here to the north of the site boundary, is a local distributor road. Following Moreland Road down here to the west, the site is in close proximity to the roundabout junction with Lower Addiscombe Road, which runs here. And Lower Addiscombe Road is part of TfL's strategic road network. The site and the area around it has a PTAL of 3, and it's important to note there are 6 bus stops within 200 metres of the site. Moving to some pictures taken in the local area. First picture taken from the eastern part of the frontage on Moreland Road. Becomes apparent, as I mentioned before, this is the 3-storey former medical centre. And a much larger 5-storey former office block that fronts Moreland Road. Moving down Moreland Road to the western extremity of the site, it's the view from the other side. And important using this photograph to make reference to the relationship with the flatted blocks, the larger flatted blocks which are referred to on the site plan. It's also a view of the site that's replicated later in the presentation through the architect's visualisations for the proposed scheme. This is a picture taken from Gordon Crescent, which is some of the smaller properties to the east of the site. And I think it's a really useful photograph for demonstrating the existing relationship between the large buildings on site and the neighbouring properties, and also gives an understanding of actually the number of windows that already currently face towards the neighbouring properties. And I think generally this photograph and the 2 that I've previously shown also give quite a clear understanding around the poor state of repair the buildings are currently in. Moving now to the proposal. This is an illustrative site plan that sets out the footprint of the proposed building within the site. Moving and looking at access into the site, here in the eastern corner of the site is the pedestrian access for pupils, and entrance and exit to the site at the before and after the school day will be actively managed by the school to ensure that congregations of pupils doesn't occur on Moreland Road, and details of that are set out within the travel plan. Vehicular access is from the other side of the site's frontage, and there are 4 car parking spaces within this area, 2 of which are disabled, and 2 minibus bays here. Strategic Transport are satisfied that there is sufficient available on-street car parking in the vicinity of the site to accommodate the demand generated by the school. Likewise, there's no pick-up or drop-off bays proposed by the school, but again, on the basis of the on-street car parking availability and the measures within the travel plan to increase sustainable transport methods for pupils and staff attending the school, Strategic Transport are satisfied with that part of the proposal. Bus capacity has been an issue that's been raised quite extensively by local residents. And TfL have been consulted on that, and TfL are satisfied that, taking into account the figures within the transport assessment provided by the applicant, that it would have a limited impact on their network. But it is recognised, as I mentioned before, that the bus capacity is a concern locally, and the Education Skills Funding Agency, who support ARC as the providers for the school, have provided evidence of a commitment between the Department for Transport and TfL, which sets out a commitment to support the requirements of free schools should the need arise for additional capacity within the Transport for London network. Finally, on this slide, I'll just take the opportunity to highlight the games area to the rear, which is currently marked out as a hard sports court, which is flexible in its nature and can be used for a number of different sports. And also, although not shown on this diagram, there is a rooftop mugger which is sunk within the building in this location here, in effect on the top floor. ARC School, who are the provider, have have confirmed that this is sufficient on-site facilities to deliver their curriculum, but if the need arises for dedicated off-site facilities for particular activity or sport, there are obviously alternatives within the local area, and details of those alternatives have been provided as part of the application. Moving on to the elevations, I think it's fair to say the applicants have worked positively through the pre-application process, including taking the proposal to place review panel and presenting to this committee previously. And now the applicant proposes a building which uses a high-quality palette of materials to provide distinctiveness and reflects the materials in the local area, but on a scale that's suitable for a public building of this size. Following the committee presentation, the applicants have made some further improvements to the scheme by increasing the depth of the reveals to the windows and introducing further highlights of the gold colour, which is prominent within the scheme, and have also improved the quality of the landscaping, not only within the frontage of the property here, but also within the rear, to ensure that it provides a suitable place for the pupils to enjoy during their school day. I think in terms of the design of the front elevation, there's just a couple of points that I'll highlight. And the first one is that the use of the lightweight material here on the top floor to try and break up the massing of the elevation, and also the use of the colour to do the same sort of job, really, in introducing more interest, more visual interest, really, within what is a large frontage of the building. And as I mentioned before, this area around the front has actively been kept open by the applicants to ensure that it helps with ensuring that there's no congregation of pupils and pedestrians, and to ensure there's sufficient space without compromising highway safety. This view is taken from the other aspect on Moorland Road. There's less to say about this other than to mention really that it helps to demonstrate the steps the applicant's taken to improve the relationship between the proposed building and the neighbouring residential properties to the east by reducing the extent of the top floor, and also, it's slightly obscured by this tree, but there's methods within the glazing here to ensure that there's no unacceptable level of overlooking. And this here, just to highlight, is the pupil entrance within the site. And as I say, one of the conditions requires a detailed assessment of landscaping, and that's one of the things obviously that we'll assess and ensure that this provides a suitable quality entrance for pupils beginning and ending their day. It's a view from the rear of the site, and I think it's helpful, really, just to illustrate the depth of the play space. And also, I think, when you remember back to those photographs that I showed from Gordon Crescent, and you see the scale of the buildings that are currently on the site, there's actually now quite a lot of open space to the rear, and the separation from the rear of the building to the properties at the rear has increased as a result of the proposal. And then finally, the final slide here, I think is helpful really just to give a flavour of the school's approach in terms of designing the building. So you can see this sort of image in the centre of the image. There's the double height sports hall, and also the double height dining hall, and they effectively, the classrooms are wrapped around those spaces so that the most actively used areas have interest throughout the day, and ensure that actually the school is quite dynamic in that sense. Also, the setback of the main entrance here, again, that's something that has evolved throughout the pre-application process to try and make more of a feature of the front end entrance. So it's not just a set of double doors on the frontage, but actually now it's an important visual aspect that your eye is drawn to it, and you're quite aware that's the main entrance into the school. And finally, as I mentioned before, there is a rooftop mugger which is floodlit, but is situated within the confines of the building, and the environmental health officers of the council are satisfied that on the basis that it is set down, noise outbreak or light pollution are all matters that can be adequately controlled and will not have an impact on neighbouring amenity. Thank you. The recommendation for the scheme is for approval.
Okay, thank you. Questions of clarification? Councillor Wright.
Thanks, Chairman. The Muga on top floor, the hours, I noticed from 8 till 10 o'clock. Was those hours mentioned to the residents when you had the local residents when you had the presentation? And presumably it will be floodlit. So is that going to be floodlit in dark hour times of the year?
That's quite correct. The mugger is proposed to be floodlit, but the environmental health officers are satisfied that on the basis that it is set within the building, that the outbreak of light will not cause any unacceptable impact on neighbour amenity. In terms of the hours of use, they follow sort of hours of use at other muggers within Croydon, but also I think it's important to mention that they were part of the detailed package of information that was submitted by the applicant, so the local residents have had the opportunity to look at them and make comments. And whilst there were certainly concerns by the local residents, the Council's environmental health team are satisfied with this part of the proposal.
Councillor Chatterjee.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Obviously, there are very good transport links. More than one of member of the committee actually know this area very well, and I'm sure most people will be aware of the good transport links, buses and so forth getting there. I'm a bit concerned about whether or not people will be crossing over the road and they might need extra zebra crossings. Is that something that's foreseen? And also barriers to prevent, because, you know, teenagers might be sort of jostling each other a bit. Could you comment a bit on those things, please?
So in relation to crossings, actually, if I just go back to the site location plan, that'll be helpful. Actually, the aerial photography here, there is a pedestrian crossing just here that's existing. And then, so that, I mean, that's in quite close proximity to the site, and no further pedestrian crossings are proposed. There are some works to the highway to the frontage here to provide the sort of normal keep clear school signs, and that obviously provides a separation and allows some breakout. But one of the things that in the travel plan the school are very detailed on is this active management of the before and end of school. It's certainly an appreciation that the foot width at the school, whilst it's sufficient size to allow that, it needs an active control, and the school are intending to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Wimborne.
I'm rather disappointed about the lack of disabled parking. Is it possible to have it in more places?
I mean, at the moment, there's 2 spaces proposed by the application. I think the way that the proposals for the site are currently laid out, there'll be no additional space for any more car parking, on the basis that minibus car parking is already provided, and the normal sort of bin storage, and there's plenty of cycle storage also, or cycle parking also provided on site.
So is it essentially a case that there simply isn't any more space to provide additional parking spaces?
Yeah, that's correct.
On the parking provision generally in travel to and from the school, I note in the report that a bronze level of travel plan is actually proposed, which isn't actually hugely aspirational in terms of switching modal transport use. I think it's the right terminology. And also that only 88 cycle parking spaces are proposed, which is half of what you would normally expect. Surely on a school, okay, there is good transport links around it. We should be encouraging the use of other forms of transport other than cars absolutely as much as possible for both the staff and for pupils. In terms of the pupils, obviously more drop-off and pick-up than anything else. But also this is an area that is flat, and we should be encouraging cycle use. And we know we've got a low take-up of cycle use generally in the borough, but this is a perfect opportunity to surely really encourage that. Could we, within the conditions, 106 agreement, etc., up the requirement of the ante on both of those 2 things, so require cycle storage up to the full provision, maybe on a monitored basis so it steps up in the future, or alternatively is provided in full to start with, and also go for a gold standard in terms of the travel plan to make sure that that we are moving people away from the use of cars in this particular case.
So if I take cycle parking first, as proposed, there's 88 spaces. The applicant has highlighted within the transport assessment some additional areas within the school's site where additional cycle storage can be provided on a monitored basis. The school would open in 2019 with the intake of Year 7 and build incrementally on that basis, and the cycle parking could be increased on the basis of take-up. In terms of the travel plan and meeting the TfL STARS programme, I think it's very wise of us to encourage the highest level of accreditation that can be achieved. And I think it's certainly something that we should look as a condition to ensure that the highest level is reached, really.
Can I then just quickly check, is gold the highest level or is there a platinum?
Gold is the highest level, and you achieve gold by reducing your number of people attending by car by less than 6%.
Okay, so that's not hugely ambitious, but if that's the top standard, then so be it. Also, trees 14 and 16. I believe they're on the frontage, and the frontage trees are quite an important aspect of this site and this immediate area. I note that the report says something like, if possible, they'll be retained. Could we include, if we are minded to agree this, approve this application, that if for any reason they can't be retained, and I understand it's because of buildings, different locations of the existing buildings compared to the proposed buildings, that actually semi-mature trees will be planted in their place?
Yes, that's certainly something that we can look to do, and something that certainly was intended by the landscaping condition that was already recommended in terms of ensuring that the landscaping respected that boulevard down Moorland Road and ensured that actually a high quality for the area was achieved.
Okay, thank you. Any further? Councillor Clowder?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. We've talked about children should walk to school, but they don't, and I just wondered what your impression of the impact of pick-up and drop-off points, because I know in some schools it causes a real headache and it causes a lot of traffic jams. So how is that going to be managed?
I think the first point on that is it's important to realise that obviously it's a secondary school, so on the basis that normally secondary school children, the higher percentage, attend by themselves, whether that be on the bus or on foot. I think it's also important to note that the ARC School in the travel plan have set out quite comprehensive details around a voluntary 200-metre exclusion zone around the school, which I think helps with, ensuring that the movement of pupils into the site is dealt with as safely as possible. And ultimately, through the transport assessment that was provided, it was set out that there was sufficient on-street car parking in the local vicinity to deal with the demands generated, particularly around pick up and drop off, and also obviously the staff.
I mean, with regards to the parking provision in the local area, I know this area well, and there isn't a huge amount of parking area. Presumably that's based on the parking that's available during the day, as opposed to the parking that's available in the evenings, when obviously the greatest parking demand exists.
Yes, I can confirm, Chair, that the applicant undertook parking beat surveys of all roads within 400 metres of the site, which is considered a sort of 5-minute walking distance. Those surveys were undertaken between 7 and 9 in the morning and 2 and 5 in the afternoon, which would be the peak times for children arriving and leaving at school. And based on the predicted number arriving by car, there was more than sufficient on-street capacity to drop off within that area.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. So, Councillor Wright?
Thanks, Chairman. Can I mention pollution? Moorland Road is a very busy road, and the pollution will be high with a school right up against it. Bearing in mind that low-level vegetation is much better to help pollution than high level. Is any consideration being given to low level landscaping as well as the trees?
To take air quality for a point, but the Council's Environmental Health team have reviewed the air quality assessment that was provided by the applicant and are satisfied that in the development of the school, but also in terms of the school day, air quality is satisfactory. In terms of the landscaping, it would incorporate the whole range of high and low, and obviously that would be something that we could take a lead on in terms of ensuring that the soft landscaping was satisfactory to address those points, really.
Okay, any further questions? No? Okay, we've got a number of people wishing to address us. We have Mr Ibrahim Begovic and Mr Grisdale, who are objectors. If you'd like to make your way down, please. We also have Mr Gunn-Jones and Mr Tatum, who are the applicant agents, who also wish to address us. If they can make their way down too, please. Hello. Right. Clearly, you are the objectors, I take it? Sorry, and your names are?
I'm Brad Grisdale.
And my name is Azra Ibrahim Begovic.
Right, okay. Sorry, we've got you down as a Mr. Apologies for that.
No problem.
Okay, then. You have up to 3 minutes between you to tell us about your concerns. Do you wish to self-regulate your time, or do you wish us to time keep for you? That happens a lot, don't worry.
You can let us know when we reach the halfway point.
Yeah, okay. We'll let you know when you stopped, when you've reached that point. Okay.
I'm happy
Thank
for
you.
you to finish, and then I will just top up at the end.
Okay. So you want
Yes.
to start?
No, you finish everything, and I will just top up at the end.
Okay. We will. If you wouldn't mind turning your light off. We just have one speaker on at a time. That's great. Thank you very much. So we'll let you know when we've reached 1.5 minutes. Okay.
Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. First off, I object to almost everything about the way that this has been planned, and I'm sure that's going to come across. I live directly opposite, and to me, this looks like it's a great huge prison opposite, and I think that's probably going to be appropriate because despite some of the slides that kind of fooled you into thinking that back playground area, as they call it in the report, is reasonably large, it's actually tiny, and there will be nowhere for those students to go. Once they're in the school, they will have to be in the school. I'm going to cut to one of the things that I didn't object to online, and I really think it's quite an important one, though. I don't think that this meets safety standards, because if there is a fire, the students are going to have to go out to the front. They can't go into the back, because they would be trapped in there if the building was on fire. If they have to go out to the front, there is no space between the building and the road. They will be on Moorland Road. And we're talking about, at the end of the population of this school, some 1,300 people, including staff, 1,300. And those people have to go somewhere, and they're going to go out the front, and they're going to be on the road. That will stop emergency services getting to any kind of emergency there in the first place. So I think this has not been well thought through as far as that's concerned. By your Planning Committee agenda here, you admit that this project only exactly meets the minimum standards for indoor use, and it doesn't meet the standards for the outdoor facilities. What that means is that the whole project...
I'm afraid that the 1.5 minutes are now up. If between you can decide how you carry on.
I allow you to finish, and I will just finish.
Okay, I'll be very quick then. So it means that this isn't really a good design. Your whole ethos is supposed to be requiring good design. This isn't good design. This is mediocre design at best for the students. And I know everybody wants to put more education places into Croydon, and I get that. Everybody wants a school to be here. The problem is this school is too big for that site. If it was half the size, nobody would be objecting. If it was half the number of pupils, nobody would say another thing about it. It's a good thing to have a school. This is just simply too big.
Thank you. Hello. I live at Square Court, which is adjacent to Rees House on the west side. I'm afraid at the moment we have a problem with the bus stop, and when buses are stopping there, none of the residents can exit that car park, and no one can access the car park until all traffic is cleared. I'm afraid that the parking spaces which they allowed for this development is not sufficient, and we already have people, public, parking their cars on our private car park, and I'm afraid that our car park is also going to be used by the staff, and it's going to create lots of problems. I'm also really concerned about the safety for the large number of people being on the street. Traffic is very fast. Motorbikers are speeding up and down. No one is controlling that traffic.
I'm afraid that's your time up.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, but thank you for letting us know your views. Thank you. We now have Mr. Gunn-Jones and Mr. Tatum. So you also have between you 3 minutes to tell us about your application. Have you decided how to split your time? And do you wish to self-monitor, or shall we let you know when you've got to a certain point?
I think if you can let us know when we get to 3 minutes.
To 3 minutes. So once you've finished. Yeah, we'll let you do that. We'll do that anyway, don't worry. Okay then, thank you.
Chair, committee members, thank you for this opportunity of addressing you this evening. In our allotted time, you're going to hear from me and James Tatum from Jestico Wiles, the architects. In July, we were here presenting to you prior to submission. Since the application was submitted, we've worked with your officers to resolve all technical queries. In addition to that, we have reviewed at some length the comments and concerns from local residents, including those mentioned by the previous speakers. Our responses to these have been provided to the Planning Department, and we have attempted to address all queries and comments to a point where, in our view, there are no unresolved matters. The result of the technical review has led to Transport for London, the Council's Strategic Transport Department, Environmental Health and the local lead flood agency all now being satisfied. So in our view, the proposals are now technically sound and robust.
In terms of design, we've worked closely with ARC to ensure the new school delivers their curriculum and meets their aspirations. We've also been involved very frequently with the planning department and the planning officers, and we've also met with the Croydon Place Review panel, as a result of which the design has evolved significantly. So it's predominantly brick now, and we've introduced a metal cladding. We've also articulated the building more, and we've improved the public realm in front of the building. In addition, we've also met with this group in July, and the scheme was generally positively reviewed, and there are a few very helpful comments in terms of addressing the design, particularly the front elevation. And as a result, we've introduced more of the gold-coloured cladding material onto the front, onto the two-storey entrances. We've made more recesses in the elevation and more cladding to the window reveals. In terms of the fire question, we do have a fire consultant on board, and we have a muster plan agreed, which is to the rear of the site and has been approved, and they're perfectly happy with that. In our view, we think this building is one that creates a very positive contribution to the community for ARC, and also in terms of the street frontage, we think makes a very positive contribution.
ARC's an education charity that has a network of 35 schools throughout England, including ARC Oval in the borough. It teaches 23,000 pupils, and all of the 11 new schools that ARC has opened have reached Ofsted good or outstanding. ARC is aiming to emulate that success in ARC Blake. It also understands through that experience the importance of working with the local community to deliver in a successful school, and that effective management, monitoring and appropriate mitigation are the keys to achieve that. It has the experience and the track record drawn from other local authorities in London, and therefore it has the ability to play an important role in education delivery in the borough, and I hope therefore that you will support the application.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay. Do officers have anything further they wish to add?
I'd just like to respond on the point around the guidelines for open space. Ultimately, the site is identified as a restricted site, which does allow more flexibility in terms of them. And there are guidelines set out by the government and not regulations that need to be met by schools.
I think just the other two things I was just going to mention. This is really quite a significant step that the ESFA have engaged with the council at pre-application quite extensively, and it's gone through a three-stage approach with quite an intensive discussion with officers before place review panel. There was a detailed discussion at place review, and then following on from that it came to this committee, and I think that's very encouraging as we move forward on free school proposals within the borough. I think the other thing I just wanted to sort of mention is that the emerging plan, as members will know, we've got the emerging site allocations, CLP, what's called CLP2, which is looking at proposals for infrastructure as well as proposals for development, does identify this as a new secondary school. As part of the sort of approach within the borough, we need to plan for schools, plan for secondary schools, and this is one of those sites that has been identified as a school. Secondary school places obviously needs to be of a certain scale that's going to work as a secondary school, and that's to a certain extent help define and help determine the site of this school and the capacity that we need to provide in terms of school places for secondary schools across the borough. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think we should just say before we go any further, one of the objectors mentioned the point about the fire escape provision and that kind of stuff, and that of course is a building control matter rather than a planning matter. So that's something that would need to be sorted out and resolved as part of that further step in the future. Although it sounds from what the applicants have just said that they have addressed that already, but just so people are aware that that is the case. Okay then, open this one to the committee. Councillor Audsley.
Thank you, Chair. We all know we need this. We need school places, secondary school places. It's good to see coming forward. I think the design is developed well. Understandably, there are some concerns and impact upon residents, but I think on balance, we should move approval. So I put that forward to us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Clowder.
Just to agree with Councillor Audsley, we need schools in the area, and I'm willing to second your approval.
Okay, thank you. I'll just quickly say, I think this, as I said, when this came before us at the pre-app, if I recall correctly, I think it's a well-designed scheme. It is a tight site for a school of this size, and no two ways about it. But as we all know, we're seeing many, many more of those. There aren't very many sites that are actually big enough for a proper for a school with a full proper external space. But I think this has been cleverly designed, well thought out. I think the idea of putting the Muga in the middle, but set down sort of on the roof, is a good idea. And also, I think the overall sort of scheme in terms of the way it's all laid out, and with the big spaces in the middle, the classrooms around the outside, is a well thought out approach. And I think the external design has developed well. I mean, we had some serious concerns about it when we first saw it, but it has developed and emerged into what I think will be a very interesting scheme, replacing a long, sort of derelict and very sad-looking building that sits there at the moment, or buildings actually that sit there at the moment. I do think we need to have as tight travel plan on this as we possibly can. I think we should go for the gold stars thing, whatever it's called, and we should be ensuring that the additional cycle provision can be provided, even if it initially isn't. But we should see how the plan should be set out to illustrate how that can be provided as and when, if and when necessary, at this early stage. I think also in terms of the traffic generation and the parking provision, we need to make sure that the 200-metre exclusion zone for drop-off is properly put in place and monitored. I think whilst a crossing isn't proposed as part of these proposals, the council will need to continue to monitor that situation and ensure that that one goes in if is needed in the future. But I think it's reasonable at this stage, given that there is a crossing just along the way, and there is another one a little bit further up the road already. That provision, I think, is reasonable. So I think with those things in place, this will be an acceptable proposal. Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? No. In that case, we have the one motion completed for approval, moved by Councillor Audsley and seconded by Councillor Clowder. Can I see those in favour of approval?
That's unanimous, Chair.
So that is approved unanimously, and that brings the meeting to a close. Thank you very much. Good night.